"You don't have to wander tonight," Annie said, rubbing her hands together as the cold seeped through her thin gloves. The man sitting curled up in front of the diner slowly lifted his head. His face was pale from the cold, his silver hair soaked with melting snow, cold drops running down his temples before disappearing into the collar of his drenched coat. His hands were red and raw, his stiff fingers locked tightly together, as if he had only enough strength left to keep himself from collapsing. He looked at Annie with the eyes of a man who had just been turned away by the whole world. "Leave me alone," he muttered. His voice was low and hoarse, almost swallowed by the wind. "Whether I wander the streets or not has nothing to do with you." Annie stood beside the wooden sign she had just brought in from the yard. Behind her, the little diner was nearly closed. Chairs had been turned upside down on the tables, and the floor still carried the faint smell of cold coffee and toasted bread. In the kitchen, Ruth was turning off the last gas burner, humming softly the way she always did when she was too tired to say another word. Outside, the wind howled between the brick buildings, driving snow against the windows in white bursts. The man pulled his coat tighter around himself, but even that expensive coat could no longer help him. The shoulders were soaked through, and the leather shoes that had once been polished to a shine were now stained with slush and mud. He hunched forward, trying to hide his trembling hands inside his sleeves, but the cold still made his breath come out in broken shivers. Annie took one step closer, very slowly, as if afraid one sudden movement might make him shrink farther away. "Sir, you're freezing." He let out a rough, bitter sound that was closer to pain than laughter. "I told you to go away." "I heard you. Then why are you still standing there?" "Because I also heard your teeth chattering." For a moment, something changed in his face. It was not a smile, only a small flicker of surprise, as if it had been a long time since anyone had seen his real condition instead of his name, his coat, or his fall from grace. But he quickly turned his face away, trying to hide the weakness that had just been noticed. From the end of the street, two familiar customers came out into the wind. One was a man in a delivery jacket with his collar pulled up to his chin, walking beside an elderly woman clutching a paper bag to her chest. They slowed when they saw Annie standing outside with the stranger. "Annie, is the diner still open?" the man asked. "We're about to close, Mr. Harris," Annie replied. "But if you need something, I can still pack some food for you." Mr. Harris glanced at the man sitting on the step. "Everything all right here?" The elderly woman leaned forward slightly, worry showing clearly on her face. "Sir, do you need us to call someone?" The man stiffened at once. "No." Annie spoke before his wounded pride could turn that kind question into another cut. "He's just catching his breath. I've got it." Mr. Harris looked at Annie, then at the man, then back at Annie. He had known her long enough to understand when not to press. "You sure?" "I'm sure." The elderly woman opened her purse and took out a few clean tissues. "Here, sweetheart, maybe he'll need these." Annie accepted them. "Thank you, Mrs. Coleman." Mrs. Coleman looked at the man with gentle eyes. "It's a cold night, sir. Don't sit out here too long." He did not answer. The two customers continued down the sidewalk, their shoes crunching over the snow until the sound faded, leaving Annie and the man beneath the flickering yellow light outside the diner. He lowered his head even more. "You should have let them walk on." "They did walk on. You know what I mean." "No, sir, I don't." He breathed out slowly, as if every word made his throat ache. "People ask questions so they can feel kind for a few seconds. Then they go home, shut their doors, and forget everything." Annie stood still, holding the tissues in one hand and the old wooden sign in the other. The sign read, "Annie's Warm Bowl, Soup, Stew, Bread, Coffee." The paint had been peeling at the corners for years, but Ruth always said that old signs were like old people in the neighborhood. The older they got, the more stories they carried. "You think everyone is like that?" Annie asked. "I know everyone is like that. You can't possibly know everyone." This time, he lifted his head, his gaze sharper, though beneath that sharpness was a wound still bleeding. "You don't know who I am." "No," Annie said, "I don't. You have no idea who you're talking to." "I guess I don't. I could be anyone." "Yes, you could. I could be dangerous." Annie looked at his trembling hands, his wet coat, and his shoulders tightening in the wind. She did not mock him, and she did not pity him in a way that would shame him. She only said softly, Maybe. But right now, you're a man sitting outside my diner, shaking from the cold, and I can't step over you like I don't see you. He looked at her for a long time. He still did not believe her. Not because Annie was lying, but because he had heard so many refusals that night that kindness had become the hardest thing to trust. The people who had once shaken his hand, eaten dinner with him, called him a friend, a father, a partner, had all vanished after phone calls no one answered. He had once owned too many doors, too many keys, too many people smiling when he still had everything. Yet now that he had lost it all in one night, even a roof to shelter under from the snow had become a luxury. Annie lowered her voice. I don't need to know who you are to know that you shouldn't be sitting out here until morning. The wind struck the window hard, making the frame rattle. The man took a deep breath and immediately folded in on himself from the cold. His hands rubbed together again, faster now, more desperately, as if he were trying to pull the last bit of warmth from his own numbed skin. His lips had gone pale, but he still clenched his jaw, trying to hold on to the fragile pride he had left. Annie leaned the sign against the wall, then sat down on the step beside him, leaving just enough space so he would not feel cornered. My grandmother says sometimes a person can survive the worst day of his life just because someone gives him a warm place to sit. I don't need your grandmother's sayings. Maybe you don't need the saying, Annie replied, but you need the warmth. The man sighed, then gave a tired, dry laugh with no joy in it. I used to have homes everywhere, he said, his eyes fixed on the snow covering the toes of his shoes. Chicago, Aspen, Palm Beach, a lake house I barely ever visited, doors everywhere, keys everywhere. He rubbed his red hands together again, this time so hard his knuckles turned white. And tonight, not one door opened for me. The words fell between them, heavier than the snow. Annie did not rush to answer. She simply turned and pointed toward the small diner behind her. Through the window, the old lights shone over the empty tables, and a thin stream of steam still carried the smell of beef stew from the kitchen. That door is still open, she said. He followed her hand with his eyes, then shook his head. You don't understand. I understand that it's small, Annie said. I understand that it isn't fancy. The heater rattles. One table tilts if you put your elbow in the wrong place. And my grandmother always says the coffee pot has more personality than some of our regulars. But it's warm in there. If you don't mind old furniture and the smell of stew, then tonight, you don't have to keep wandering. His face tightened. This time, it was not from anger, but from humiliation. He lowered his head, his voice so quiet it was almost lost. I don't have any money. Annie did not even blink. I didn't ask you that. I'm telling you because eventually everyone does ask. Maybe the people you used to know do. He looked down at his soaked shoes. A man who had once signed million-dollar contracts now did not dare step into a small diner because he could not pay for a bowl of soup. The truth of it seemed to make his shoulders sink even lower. I can't pay you. Annie nodded once, calm, as if the answer were simple. My grandmother says when people are hungry and cold, that comes first. Paying someone back can wait. That sounds like a terrible way to run a business. After midnight, this place isn't always just a business, Annie said. Sometimes it's just a door, and a door should open when someone outside is about to fall down. He swallowed hard. His throat tightened. Whether from the cold or from the kindness he had not heard in so long, he could not tell. You shouldn't trust strangers. I don't trust everything, Annie replied, but I trust the cold. I know what it does to people when no one opens the door. The door behind Annie opened. A wave of warmth spilled out, carrying the smell of stew and bread. Ruth Johnson stood there in her old apron, her silver hair wrapped neatly in a blue scarf. She looked at Annie, then at the man on the step. She did not ask who he was, why he was there, or whether he could pay. Annie, she said gently, I think he's very cold, Grandma. Ruth looked at the man with the eyes of someone who had lived long enough to recognize pain, whether it wore an expensive coat or a torn one. Then bring him in before the weather makes the sorrow inside him any heavier. The man shook his head at once. Ma'am, I can't pay. Ruth's expression did not change. Then don't start with money. I don't want charity. Annie stood and held out her hand. She did not pull him, did not push him, only left her hand there like an invitation. Then don't call it charity. Call it a bowl of soup. He looked at her hand. His pride tried to hold out for one more second, but the cold had worn him down, and perhaps Annie's gentle kindness had weakened him even more. Slowly, he placed his stiff, ice-cold hand into hers. Annie helped him to his feet. When he stepped across the threshold, the small bell above the door gave a tired little ring. The diner was plain and nearly empty, but inside there was yellow light, warmth from the old heater, and the smell of food still hot from the stove. Ruth pulled a chair closer to the heater. Annie went into the kitchen, filled a bowl with beef stew, added 2 slices of bread beside it, and carried it out to him. The man sat down very slowly, as if it had been a long time since he had been allowed to sit somewhere without proving he still had value. Annie placed the spoon in his hand. Eat first. If you want to talk later, you can. If you don't, that's all right too. He looked at the hot bowl of stew in front of him, then at Annie. Something trembled in his eyes, weak and wounded. Why are you doing this? Annie pulled the napkin closer to him. Because someday, maybe I'll be the one sitting outside in the cold. And I hope that when that day comes, someone won't make me tell my whole life story before they open the door. He lowered his head toward the bowl. His hand was still shaking as he lifted the first spoonful. Steam rose and touched his pale face. He put the spoon into his mouth, then closed his eyes for a long moment as the warmth moved down his throat. No one in the diner said another word. William took another spoonful of soup. The heat from the small bowl slowly spread through his throat, down into his chest, and seemed to seep into every vein that had gone numb from the cold. For one brief moment, his hand stopped shaking. He lowered the spoon and closed his eyes. It was not just the taste of the food. It was the painfully unfamiliar feeling of having a bowl of soup placed in front of him without anyone asking how much money he had left, without anyone measuring whether he deserved to be helped. Annie brought him a cup of hot tea and gently set it beside the bowl. Be careful. There's ginger in it. My grandmother says ginger wakes up the things the cold tries to put to sleep. William opened his eyes and looked at her. Does your grandmother have a saying for everything? Almost. She must be very tired. She is, Annie said, the faintest smile touching her lips. But she's usually right. From the kitchen, Ruth called out. I heard that. Annie raised her voice. I said you were right. You said it after something else. William almost laughed. It was only the smallest movement at the corner of his mouth, but it disappeared before it could fully form. He looked back down at the bowl of soup. The spoon rested between his red, stiff fingers, looking so unfamiliar that it hurt him to see it. A man who had once held a pen and signed contracts that made entire rooms hold their breath now had to focus all his strength just to keep a spoon from falling out of his hand. Annie pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, folding her hands lightly on the table. You don't have to tell me anything, sir. But if there's someone we need to call for you, we can. No. The answer came too quickly, sharper than he intended. Annie kept her voice gentle. Everybody has someone they want to turn to. William pressed his lips together. Not tonight. Annie stayed quiet. She did not push. The only sounds in the diner were the heater ticking against the wall and the wind striking the window. A car passed outside, its tires hissing softly through the slush, and then the street fell silent again. What about family? She asked softly. The spoon in William's hand touched the edge of the bowl with a tiny sound. His face hardened, as if anger had risen to protect the weak place inside him. But a few seconds later, his breathing changed. It became shorter, faster, more broken. He set the spoon down very carefully, but his hand shook so badly that the bowl shifted slightly on the table. Annie's voice grew quieter. Sir? William lifted one hand to cover his mouth. The first sound that escaped him barely sounded like crying. It was more like a broken breath, half swallowed, half released. Then another followed. His shoulders trembled. The composure he had tried to keep since stepping into the diner finally collapsed. He bent over the table, covered his face with both hands, and began to cry with the helplessness of a man who no longer had the strength to protect his pride. If William's pain touched your heart, please like this video to show your support. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because someone near you may be watching this story too. And if you want more emotional and inspiring stories like this, please subscribe to the channel. Annie did not panic, and she did not rush to stop him. She simply reached for the stack of napkins and gently pushed them across the table. "You're all right," she said softly. "You're inside now. You're warm. No one is asking you to do anything right now." "I can't," he choked out. "You don't have to try. I can't believe he did it." His voice broke on the last words. Annie remained still. "Who did it?" William drew in a deep breath, but it caught in his throat. He reached for the tea, tried to lift it, then set it back down because his hand would not obey him. "My son." In the kitchen, Ruth's movements suddenly stopped. William swallowed hard, as if the truth itself had sharp edges that scraped his throat. "My own son." Annie's eyes softened, but she did not offer easy comfort. She had heard enough late-night stories from people life had pushed into a corner to know that sometimes words like, "everything will be all right," only made pain sound small. "What did he do to you?" she asked. William pressed a napkin to his eyes, angry at his own tears and too exhausted to hide them. He had the papers ready, legal papers. He said everything was urgent. He said the company was in danger. He said there were investors waiting to swallow everything I had built if I didn't sign before morning. He let out a dry, bitter laugh. Protection, that was the word he used. He said he was protecting me. Annie glanced toward Ruth, then looked back at him. "He tricked you into signing?" He smiled while he did it. William's voice dropped, sounding more exhausted than the wind outside. "That's what I can't forget. Not the papers, not the small print, the calm on his face. It was as if he had practiced looking sincere in the mirror 100 times. Ruth came out of the kitchen and placed a small plate of buttered bread on the table. "Eat a little bread with your tea," she said. William looked up. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I can swallow." "Try one bite," Ruth replied. Pain hits harder on an empty stomach. He took a piece of bread, not because he wanted to eat, but because refusing her kindness felt harder than accepting it. His hand trembled as he broke the bread in half. Annie waited until he had taken a small bite before asking, "What happened after you signed?" "The company slipped out of my hands, the family office, the properties, the accounts, the voting rights on the board, the house I walked out of tonight." He stopped, pressed his lips together, then corrected himself in a lower voice. "No, I didn't walk out. I was asked to leave." Annie's brow furrowed. "He put you out in this weather?" William nodded slowly. "Security opened the gate. Men I had paid for years. They stood there and opened it for me as if I were an unwanted guest. Not one of them could look me in the eye." "That's wrong," Annie said. William looked at her, and his familiar defensiveness flickered back for a moment. "Right and wrong don't mean much once the papers are signed." Ruth pulled a chair from the next table and sat at the end of theirs, close enough to be present but not in the middle of the conversation. "Paper can carry a lie," she said, "but that doesn't turn the lie into the truth." William looked at her. "In my world, it does. Then your world needs better people in it." The simple sentence left William silent. He looked down at the piece of bread in his hand. "I thought I had them." "Who?" Annie asked. "Friends, partners, family." He shook his head, his eyes hollow. "I called them. My brother. My lawyer. People who used my name when it opened doors for them. People who were willing to answer my calls at midnight when there was money to be made. Tonight, one by one, they disappeared. Some didn't answer. Some sent me straight to voicemail. One texted that he hoped I understood he couldn't get involved." Annie's jaw tightened. "That's what they said after taking everything they could from you? They would call it business caution. What do you call it?" William turned toward the window. Snow kept sliding past the glass in cold, endless sheets of white. "Cowardice. Maybe convenience. Maybe the truth I should have seen a long time ago." Annie laid both forearms on the table. "Sometimes people don't become strangers overnight, sir. Sometimes a terrible night only shows you they were strangers all along." William turned back to look at her. "You sound just like your grandmother," he said. "She raised me. That makes sense." Ruth hummed softly. "And don't you forget it." For the first time since he had stepped into the diner, William breathed a little easier. Not much, just enough to lift the teacup with both hands. He drank slowly. The warmth of the ginger spread through his throat, sharp and steady, as if reminding his body that it was still alive. Annie looked at him from across the table. "What's your name, sir?" He hesitated. If he said it, everything might change. Kindness might turn into shock. Help might turn into calculation. Or worse, He would have to see in her eyes the pity he feared most. "William," he said at last. "William Harrington." Annie blinked once. She knew that name. Anyone in Chicago who had ever seen a restaurant sign, a grocery shelf, a local news report, or a business headline knew the Harrington name, but she did not step back, did not gasp, and did not change her voice. "All right, Mr. Harrington," she said, "then keep eating your stew before it gets cold." He looked at her, almost confused. "That's it? What else should I do?" Most people would have a lot of questions. "I have plenty," Annie said, "but I'm tired, and my grandmother will fuss if that bowl is still full." Ruth stood, satisfaction clear on her face. "Smart girl." William looked down at the stew. Something inside him loosened. It was not healing. It was not repair. It was only enough to let him breathe, without feeling as if his chest would break open. He took another spoonful, then another. Annie stood and began lowering the chairs from the tables to prepare for the morning, giving him space without making him feel abandoned. Ruth returned to the kitchen, where water ran softly from the faucet. After a while, William spoke again, his voice quieter than before. "I don't know what will happen when morning comes." Annie carried 2 cups toward the counter. "Morning can wait outside with the snow." He looked at her. She nodded gently toward the bowl. "Tonight, you finish this first. Then my grandmother will find you a dry blanket. For now, that is enough." William wanted to argue. He wanted to say that men like him did not sleep in small diners, did not accept blankets from strangers, did not sit helplessly under yellow lights with the smell of stew in the air while his son wore everything he had just stolen. But he had no strength left for the pride that had kept him cold down to the bone. So in the end, he only nodded. By the time Ruth finished washing the last pot, the clock above the counter had moved past midnight. William had eaten half the stew, then stopped as if his body remembered exhaustion before hunger could finish its work. Annie did not push him. She took the bowl, covered it, and set it near the warmer. "You can finish it later," she said. William looked embarrassed. "I don't usually leave food. You don't usually get thrown into a snowstorm either, I'm guessing." Ruth gave Annie a look from the sink. "Annie, what?" "I said it respectfully." William lowered his eyes, but the corner of his mouth moved slightly. It was not a real smile. Not yet. But it was the first crack in the hard shell around him. Ruth dried her hands on a towel and came around the counter with an old gray blanket folded over her arm. "There's a couch in the back room," she said. "It's not much, but it's better than that step outside." "I can't take your office," William said. Ruth gave him a calm look. "It's not an office. It's a storage room with a couch that complains when anybody sits on it. You'll survive." Annie went ahead and opened the narrow door beside the kitchen. The back room was small, filled with canned tomatoes, sacks of potatoes, paper cups, folded tablecloths, and a couch pushed against the far wall. A lamp with a crooked shade gave off a soft amber light. On one shelf sat a framed photo of Ruth with a man in a work shirt, both of them younger, both smiling in front of the same diner. William stopped at the doorway. "This is your family space." "It's our everything space," Annie said. "Storage, break room, planning room, crying room when rent is due. Tonight, it's a guest room." He looked around, taking in the worn rug, the stacked boxes, the spare aprons hanging from hooks. The room was smaller than one of his old walk-in closets, but there was no cold in it, no locked gate, no voice telling him to leave. Ruth set the blanket on the couch. "Bathroom is down the hall. There are towels in the cabinet. Don't touch the blue tin on the second shelf unless you want sewing needles in your fingers." William nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson." "Miss Ruth is fine. Everybody around here calls me that." "Thank you, Miss Ruth." She accepted that with a small nod. Annie brought in a cup of water and placed it on a crate beside the couch. "You need anything else?" William looked at the cup, the blanket, the lamp, the girl who had refused to leave him outside. "No. You've already done more than most people I know." "That's a sad thing to say." "It's a true thing to say." Annie did not answer right away. She stood in the doorway, her hand resting on the frame. "Tomorrow doesn't have to be figured out tonight." William let out a slow breath. "Tomorrow may not give me much choice. Maybe, but tonight did, and you chose to come in." He looked at her then, really letting the words reach him. "You make that sound simple." "It kind of is. Not easy, just simple." Ruth stepped behind Annie. "Let the man rest." Annie nodded. "Good night, Mr. Harrington." William hesitated at the name, still unused to hearing it without weight behind it. "Good night, Annie." She pulled the door partway closed, leaving it open just enough for the hallway light to slip through. William sat on the couch and removed his wet shoes carefully, as if even the act of undressing from disaster required manners. His socks were damp. His feet ached. His hands burned as the feeling came back into them. From the front room, he heard Annie and Ruth moving quietly through the final closing routine. Chairs settled. The register drawer opened and closed. A broom moved over the floor, their voices carried in pieces. "He looks awful," Annie whispered. "He has had an awful night. Do you think he's really William Harrington? I think pain doesn't lie as easily as people do. What if someone comes looking for him? Then we ask what they want before we open the door." William closed his eyes. He should have been offended by their caution. Once, people trusted him before he entered a room. Now 2 women with an old diner and a tired heater were deciding whether he was safe enough to shelter. The strange part was that he respected them more for it. His phone was dead in his coat pocket. His old life, with its assistants and drivers and private numbers, felt less like a life than a theater set. Struck down after the final act, he thought of Preston sitting in the estate, probably pouring himself a drink from William's cabinet, probably already sending messages to lawyers, board members, reporters. By morning, the official story would be polished. William would be described as emotional, unstable, resistant to necessary transition. Preston would use calm words. Men like him always did. A bitter thought rose in William's mind. I taught him that. I taught him how to control a room, how to speak softly when the knife was already in. He opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling. A thin water stain curved above the couch like a brown map. He almost laughed. A few hours ago, he had been standing under a chandelier worth more than this building. Now he was counting stains above a couch that smelled faintly of flour and old fabric. Yet the chandelier had watched him be discarded. This ceiling, poor and cracked as it was, had accepted him without question. In the front room, Ruth turned off another light. Annie's voice came again, softer now. "Grandma? If his son did all that, how does a person come back from it?" There was a pause. Ruth answered slowly. "First, he has to decide he still wants to be a person, not just a wound." William swallowed. The words found him through the gap in the door and stayed. Annie said, "He looked like he gave up. Then we gave him soup. That's all we can do tonight." That doesn't feel like enough. Enough is not always big, Annie. Sometimes enough is keeping somebody breathing until morning. The diner went quiet after that. William sat with those words longer than he expected. Keeping somebody breathing until morning. No investor had ever said anything so useful to him. No consultant had ever placed a human life into such plain order. After a while, Annie knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Sorry, I forgot to leave this." She stepped in with a pair of thick socks, folded and clean. They were my grandfather's. Grandma keeps extra clothes for people who need them. William looked at the socks but did not reach for them right away. "Your grandfather? He passed a few years ago. Grandma says he'd fuss if warm socks sat in a drawer while somebody needed them. I'm not sure I should take these." Annie came closer and set them beside the cup of water. "Then borrow them." That word landed gently. Borrow. Not beg, not owe, not receive charity. Borrow, as if dignity could remain intact while need was answered. William nodded. "Thank you." Annie turned to leave, then paused. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up. "When you said you had doors everywhere, did any of them ever feel like home?" The question was too clean, too direct. He wanted to say yes because a man with estates in several states should not have to think about it. But the answer took too long. Annie understood without making him say it. "Get some sleep, Mr. Harrington." She left before he could respond. William changed into the dry socks and covered himself with the blanket. The couch sank under him with a tired groan, just as Ruth had warned. He turned slightly, careful with his sore back, and listened to the building settle. Pipes clicked. Wind pressed against the rear wall. Somewhere outside, a siren passed and faded. He did not pray often. He had always considered action more reliable than prayer. But that night, in the back room of a diner owned by two women he had not known before the snow found him. A single thought rose inside him like a confession. Let me not waste this door. He slept in short, uneasy pieces. Each time he woke, he expected cold stone beneath him, the gate at his back, Preston's voice in his ears. Instead, he found the gray blanket, the crooked lamp, the smell of bread, and the quiet proof that not every door in the world had closed. Just before dawn, Ruth entered the kitchen and began the day's first stockpot. The sound of water filling steel woke him. Then came onions on a cutting board, the scrape of a match, the low cough of the stove catching flame. William sat up slowly. His body hurt, but his mind was clear in a way that surprised him. He folded the blanket, put the borrowed socks neatly beside the couch, and stepped into the hallway. Annie was already at the counter, tying her apron. She turned when she heard him. "You're up early," she said. "So are you. This place doesn't open itself." William glanced toward the kitchen, where Ruth was stirring the pot like the morning had trusted her with its first breath. Then he looked at the stacked chairs, the chipped sign waiting by the door, the menu board with prices written in chalk. For the first time since the contracts, his mind did not go to what had been taken. It went to what could still be built. "Annie," he said carefully, "do you need help before opening?" She studied him for a second. "Can you mop?" William looked at the bucket near the wall, then at his hands. The red had faded, but the ache remained. "I can learn." Annie handed him the mop. "Then start in the corner and don't drown the floor." William took it. The first stroke was awkward, the second was better. Ruth glanced out from the kitchen and said nothing, but her mouth softened. Outside, Chicago was still buried in snow. Inside, Annie's warm bowl began another day, and William Harrington, who had lost an empire overnight, found himself standing under old lights, learning how to clean a diner floor before sunrise. By 6 in the morning, the first regular pushed through the door with snow on his shoulders and a lunch pail in his hand. Marcus Bell from the repair shop next door stamped his boots on the mat, pulled off his cap, and gave Ruth a nod that carried years of habit. "Morning, Miss Ruth." "Morning, Marcus. Coffee?" "Black is bad news." "You always say that like you enjoy bad news." "I enjoy surviving it." Annie smiled from behind the counter and reached for his mug before he asked. William stood near the far corner with the mop in his hand, unsure whether to keep working or move out of the way. Marcus noticed him at once, the way men who had spent time in uniform noticed changes in a room without making a show of it. "New help?" Marcus asked. "For now," Ruth said. William lowered the mop. "Good morning." Marcus looked at his damp hair, borrowed socks, and tired face, then gave a short nod. "Morning. Floor looks better than it did yesterday." Annie glanced down. Barely. William looked at the streaks he had left across the old tile. "I may have overestimated my technique." Marcus took his coffee. A man who can admit that before sunrise might still be useful. The remark was plain, not unkind. William accepted it with a slight nod and returned to the corner, this time using less water as Annie had told him. The work was simple, but not easy. His back ached. His hands still burned from the cold, yet there was relief in being given a task no one could steal with legal language. Bucket, mop, floor, do it right or do it again. The diner came alive in small waves. 2 sanitation workers came in for stew packed in wide paper bowls. A nurse from the night shift ordered coffee and chicken soup to take home. An older man in a brown coat counted quarters on the counter until Annie quietly slid the last few coins back toward him and said, "You paid me yesterday, Mr. Doyle. Don't argue before breakfast." "I didn't pay you yesterday. You tipped me last week. I'm applying it forward. That is not how math works." "That is how my math works," Ruth called from the kitchen. "Let the girl do her math, Earl." The old man tucked the coins away. Embarrassed, but grateful. William noticed. He noticed everything now because he had nowhere else to look. Annie did not make people feel poor when she helped them. Ruth did not make people feel small when she fed them. The place had rules, but they were human rules, shaped by hunger, pride, weather, age, and memory. At 7:30, the breakfast rush hit. William tried to stay useful. He carried clean spoons to the counter, wiped a table after 2 men left, and nearly dropped a tray of coffee when a delivery driver brushed past him too quickly. Careful, Annie said, catching one cup before it tipped. I had it. No, you had half of it and hope. Marcus laughed from his stool. That girl will tell the truth even if it costs her a tip. It usually doesn't, Annie said. People like knowing where the ground is. William set the tray down and took a breath. In his former life, he had reviewed quarterly reports before sunrise, spoken with supply teams in 3 time zones, and made decisions that shifted markets. Here, he was learning not to spill coffee. The humiliation should have cut deeper. Instead, it steadied him. No one here cared about the man he had been. They only cared whether he could keep up. When the rush thinned, Annie leaned both palms on the counter and exhaled. That was heavier than Tuesday usually gets. Weather, Ruth said. Cold brings people to soup. Cold and the busted heater at the bus office, Marcus added. Half the drivers are going to come through by noon. Annie reached under the counter for a small notebook with a bent cover. William saw columns of numbers written in pencil, some erased so often the paper had thinned. She counted bills from the register, set aside a portion in an envelope marked rent, then frowned at a supplier invoice. Ruth saw it. How bad? Potatoes went up again. Beef too. And Mr. Kaplan wants the back rent by Friday. Marcus's jaw moved. He told you end of the month. He changed his mind after he saw the line outside yesterday. Ruth wiped her hands on her apron. Greed has good eyesight. Annie closed the notebook quickly when she realized William was near. Sorry. Family business. I understand. No offense. None taken. But he did understand more than she knew. He had spent his life reading businesses by their pressure points. A rising supply cost. A landlord testing weakness. A menu priced by kindness instead of margin. Loyal customers, strong food, poor leverage. Annie's warm bowl had a heart that could fill a room, but the numbers around it were tightening like a fist. A man in a navy overcoat entered around 8, not a regular judging by the way he checked the corners before ordering. He asked for coffee only, then used the counter to sort through papers in a leather folder. William saw the logo on one page and went still. Harrington Foods and Hospitality Group. The old red crest. His old crest. Annie noticed his hand pause on the rag. You okay? William turned slightly away. Fine. The man with the folder spoke into his phone, keeping his voice low but not low enough. Yes. Preston wants the announcement positioned as a leadership modernization. No. Do not say removal. Say transition. Mr. Harrington is taking personal time after an internal restructuring. William's fingers tightened around the rag. Personal time. Internal restructuring. His own downfall being turned into a paragraph before he had finished his first morning in borrowed socks. Annie followed his attention to the man. She understood enough. Do you want to step in the back? No. You sure? If I hide every time someone lies politely, I'll spend the rest of my life in storage rooms. The man ended the call, gathered his papers, and placed $3 on the counter. He glanced at William once with vague recognition, then again with sudden certainty. His face changed. Mr. Harrington? The diner quieted around that name. William folded the rag and set it beside the sink. Good morning. The man's mouth opened, then closed. He looked toward the door as if calculating the safest exit. I didn't realize. No, William said. People rarely realize where a man lands after they help push. The man flushed. I had nothing to do with. Coffee's $3. Annie cut in, her voice calm. You paid. You can go. He looked at her, offended by the simplicity of being dismissed. Excuse me? Annie held his gaze without raising her voice. You heard me. For a second, William thought the man might argue. Then Marcus turned slightly on his stool. Not threatening, just present. Ruth came out of the kitchen, with a ladle in her hand. The man gathered his folder and left, the bell above the door shaking after him. Annie looked at William. You all right? He gave a quiet laugh through his nose. I'm beginning to dislike that question. Fair. Want a different one? What? Do you want coffee? This time, the laugh almost became real. Yes. She poured him a mug and set it on the counter. On the house. You keep giving things away. This place will close. Annie pointed at the notebook. It might anyway. The honesty in her voice struck him harder than complaint would have. He picked up the mug and took a slow drink. The coffee was strong, slightly bitter, and better than anything served in his old executive lounge because no one here pretended it was more than coffee. "May I see the notebook?" he asked. Annie pulled it closer. "Why? Because your landlord is testing you, your supplier is overcharging you, your menu is underpriced in the wrong places, and your morning traffic is strong enough to support a better breakfast bundle." She blinked. "That is a lot to get from standing by a mop bucket. I told you I used to work in food. You said a little. I may have understated." Ruth crossed her arms. "By how much?" William looked from Ruth to Annie, then at the diner that had opened its door when every other door had closed. Pride would have made him hide the truth. Gratitude required better. "I built Harrington Foods," he said. "Not inherited, built. I know kitchens, suppliers, leases, margins, customer flow, packaging, delivery, and what makes people come back, even when they have cheaper options." Annie did not speak right away. Her fingers rested on the notebook. "And you think you can fix this?" "No," William said. "Not fix. Help, if you allow it." Ruth studied him with the patience of a woman who had seen many men talk big near coffee and do little near dishes. "Why?" William looked toward the door, where snow still moved across the glass. "Because last night you gave me a place to sit when I had nowhere to go. This morning you gave me work when I had no name worth using. I can't repay that with money right now." Annie's face softened, but her guard remained. "We didn't ask you to repay it. I know. That's why I want to." Marcus lifted his mug. "Let the man look at the numbers. Worst case, he learns what potatoes cost." Annie almost smiled. "He might faint." "I have survived worse than potatoes," William said. Ruth pulled out the chair beside the counter. "Sit then. But understand this, Mr. Harrington. This place feeds people who count nickels. We don't turn it into one of those restaurants where the plate is big and the food is scared." William sat down and nodded. "Agreed." Annie slid the notebook across the counter. It was small, worn, and full of careful pencil marks. William opened it with both hands, as if it were not just a ledger but a trust being placed before him. Outside, the city began its gray winter morning. Inside, steam rose from the stockpot, coffee warmed the air, and William Harrington saw the first shape of a future he had not expected. Not a return to the tower he had lost, but a chance to build from a counter, a notebook, and a girl who had opened the door. William spent the next 2 hours at the counter with Annie's notebook open in front of him, a pencil in his hand and a mug of coffee going cold beside his elbow. He did not touch the numbers at first. He read them the way some men read letters from home, slowly, respectfully, looking for the story under each line. Potatoes, beef, carrots, onions, flour, coffee, takeout bowls, rent, gas, repairs, paper napkins, cleaning supplies. Every dollar had been written down in Annie's neat hand, but the pages carried more than math. They carried worry. Annie stood across from him, arms folded, trying not to look nervous. "You're making that face again." "What face?" "The face people make right before they say something bad but dress it up nice." William looked up. "I wasn't dressing anything up." "So it's bad?" "It's fixable. That means bad." Ruth, who was cutting celery at the prep table, gave a soft sound. "Let the man finish before you bury the place." William turned the notebook slightly so Annie could see. "Your food cost is too high on the beef stew, but not because the recipe is wrong. You're buying from a supplier who treats you like a small account with no choices. You pay almost 20% more than you should." Annie frowned. "We tried 2 other places. One wanted a minimum order we couldn't meet. The other sent us meat that looked tired." "Tired meat," Marcus said from his stool, where he had returned after checking the repair shop. "That's a crime against stew." "It is," Ruth said without looking up. William tapped the page. "You also sell the stew too cheap during lunch and too expensive for the wrong customers at night." Annie's eyebrow lifted. "How can it be both?" "Because lunch customers want speed and fullness. They'll pay a little more if the portion is consistent and includes bread. Late-night customers come in colder, slower, and often alone. Some can pay, some can't. You should stop pretending one price fits every hour of the day." Ruth paused with the knife in her hand. "That sounds like fancy talk." "It's not fancy," William said. "It's respect for the way people actually live." Annie's expression changed a little at that. She pulled the notebook closer. "So what would you do?" "I'd create 3 clear meals. Morning coffee and bread for workers who don't have time to sit. Lunch bowls priced to keep the doors open. Evening soup with the pay-it-forward option you already practice, just written plainly so people understand they can help without making anyone beg. Annie looked toward the chalkboard above the counter. It listed too many items in different sizes. Some squeezed into the corners, some crossed out and rewritten. Grandma hates changing the board. Ruth pointed the knife gently toward her. Grandma hates bad handwriting. There's a difference. William almost smiled. Then we start with the board. The morning softened into late day. Customers came and went. William did not try to take over. He asked questions, listened, and wrote in the margins. What time did the bus drivers come in? Which soup sold out first? Who needed softer bread? How many people asked for takeout but left when the line got long? Annie answered most of it from memory. Ruth corrected details without moving from the stove. Marcus added what he knew from the shop window, which was more than anyone expected. By 3 o'clock, William had drawn a simple layout on the back of a paper bag. One line for ordering, one for pickup. Coffee closer to the register. Bread baskets moved away from the corner. 3 soups listed large enough for older eyes to read from the door. Annie studied the drawing as if he had handed her a map to a place she had walked past for years without seeing. It's still our place, right? She asked. William set down the pencil. It has to be. If it stops feeling like yours, people will know before you do. Ruth looked at him for a long second. That is the first thing you've said today that makes me trust the rest. Before William could answer, the door opened, and a stout man in a dark coat stepped in, shaking snow from his sleeves. Annie's shoulders tightened. Mr. Kaplan, she said. The landlord removed his gloves 1 finger at a time. He had a round face, a small mouth, and the look of a man who enjoyed arriving when people were busy. Miss Johnson. Miss Ruth. Ruth's voice cooled. Afternoon. Kaplan glanced around the diner, his eyes moving over the full tip jar, the chalkboard, the fresh bread cooling near the counter. Business looks healthy. Annie wiped her hands on her apron. We're doing our best, I'm sure. He reached inside his coat and pulled out an envelope. Then you'll understand why I need the overdue rent by Friday. All of it. No extensions. Annie took the envelope but did not open it. You told us the end of the month. I reconsidered. Ruth set down her knife. Rent doesn't usually grow legs and walk closer. Kaplan smiled like he had heard something amusing from someone beneath his patience. The neighborhood is changing. Properties are being reevaluated. I have to protect my interests. William stood near the counter, silent, watching the man's posture, the way he avoided saying increase, until he had cornered them with due dates. Annie opened the envelope and read the paper. The color drained slightly from her face, but her voice stayed even. This says you're raising rent in 60 days. That is correct. This is almost double. It is still below what I could get from a national tenant. Marcus rose from his stool. National tenant going to fix that roof leak you ignored for 6 months? Kaplan's smile disappeared. This is a private matter. Funny, Marcus said. That leak wasn't private when water ran into my boots during breakfast. Annie lifted a hand slightly, asking Marcus not to push. Then she looked at Kaplan. We'll pay what we owe by Friday. But this increase will hurt us. Kaplan shrugged. Success invites adjustment. William heard Ruth's earlier warning in those words. Blessings attract thieves too. He stepped forward. May I see the lease? Kaplan looked him over, recognizing the coat, the worn face, not yet the name. And you are? Someone asking to see the lease before you pressure 2 women in the middle of their workday. Annie turned to William quickly. It's okay. It's not, William said softly. Kaplan's eyes narrowed. I don't discuss contracts with strangers. Then discuss them with your tenants after giving proper written notice, not with vague threats and a folded paper that looks like it was typed in a hurry. William reached for the envelope, and Annie, after one uncertain beat, handed it to him. He scanned the letter. The language was sloppy, aggressive, and legally thin. This is not a formal notice. It is a scarecrow. Kaplan stiffened. Excuse me? It looks big from a distance. Up close, it's sticks and old clothing. Marcus coughed into his fist to hide a laugh. Ruth did not bother hiding hers. Kaplan's face reddened. I don't know who you think you are. William looked at him calmly. Today? A man reading bad paperwork. Kaplan reached for the letter, but William kept it on the counter. You can send proper notice through certified mail. You can document repairs. You can explain how you calculated the increase. Until then, they will pay the current rent under the existing terms. And you will not use a snowstorm and a busy lunch hour to frighten them into agreement. The diner went very quiet. Annie looked at William as if another door had opened in him, one leading to the man he had been before the snow. Kaplan looked from William to Ruth, then to Marcus, and understood he had lost the room. This isn't over, Kaplan said. No, Ruth replied. But your coffee is getting cold somewhere else. Kaplan snatched his gloves from the counter and left. The bell shook hard behind him. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Marcus lifted his mug. I vote we keep him. Annie turned to William, half grateful, half alarmed. You didn't have to do that. Yes, William said. I did. You just met us. You opened the door. That doesn't mean you owe us a war with our landlord. It isn't a war, it's a lease. He handed the paper back. And he is weaker than he wants you to think. Ruth came closer, studying him. You handled that like a man who knows where people hide knives. William looked down at the pencil marks on the paper bag. I used to sit at tables with men who smiled while moving millions. Mr. Kaplan is not original. Annie's worry did not fully fade. People like him don't like being embarrassed. No, William said. They don't. So we don't embarrass him again unless we have to. We prepare. Prepare how? He turned the paper bag over and drew 3 columns. Rent, suppliers, daily sales. First, we stop guessing. We find every leak in the numbers. Second, we call the supplier before closing and ask for a better rate. Third, we fix the menu before tomorrow morning. Fourth, we put your pay it forward bowl on the board where people can see it. Annie looked at the columns, then at him. You make it sound like we have a chance. William picked up the pencil again. His hands still ached from the cold, but they were steady now. You have more than a chance. You have good food, loyal customers, and a reason people come back. Most businesses would pay a fortune for one of those. And what do you get? Annie asked. The question was fair. He respected her for asking it. William looked around the diner, Ruth at the stove, Marcus at the counter, Annie holding the letter that had scared her less once someone stood beside her. For now, he said. A place to be useful. Ruth nodded once, as if that answer passed a test she had not announced. Then be useful before supper. That chalkboard won't rewrite itself. Annie handed him a clean cloth and a piece of chalk. Can you write big? William glanced at the old board. I can learn. This time, when Annie smiled, it was not only kindness, it was the first fragile sign of trust. Outside, the snow kept falling over Chicago, but inside Annie's warm bowl, the day had shifted. William had arrived as a man without a door. By evening, he was standing on a chair, chalk in hand, helping rewrite the first menu of a future none of them had planned. By closing time, William's chalk handwriting had taken over the board above the counter. The old menu, once crowded with crossed-out prices and cramped notes, had been wiped clean. In its place were 3 simple sections Ruth could read from the kitchen, and Marcus could read from the door without putting on his glasses. Morning bread and coffee, working lunch bowls, evening stew. Underneath, in Annie's careful hand, was a new line William had asked her to write herself. Pay it forward bowl. $2 added to any order buys soup for someone who needs it. Annie stood with the chalk still in her fingers, looking at that last sentence longer than the others. You really think people will do it? William wiped chalk dust from his hands with a towel. Some will, some won't. But people can't help with something they don't know exists. Ruth stepped out of the kitchen, arms folded over her apron. And what about the ones who come in needing it? You want them pointing at a board and announcing they're broke? No, William said. Never. The board is for the giver. The receiving stays quiet. Annie already knows who needs help. You both do. Annie glanced at Ruth. We keep a card box under the counter. If somebody pays forward, we put a card in. If somebody needs soup, we take one out. Ruth thought about it, then gave a slow nod. No names? No names, Annie said. No speeches? No speeches. No making folks feel like they owe the whole room gratitude for a bowl? William answered this time. No, dignity is part of the meal. Ruth looked at him for a moment, then reached for the chalk and added one more line in smaller letters beneath Annie's sentence. Ask quietly, eat fully. Marcus read it from his stool and tapped his coffee mug on the counter. That'll preach. The next morning tested everything. Annie opened the door at 6, and the cold pushed in with the first wave of customers. William was already behind the counter with a towel over his shoulder, not because he belonged there yet, but because Ruth had told him if he was going to advise a diner, he had better know where the clean cups were kept. The breakfast line formed faster than usual. Bus drivers, snowplow workers, nurses coming off shift, 2 men from the hardware store, and Mrs. Coleman with her paper bag tucked under her arm. Annie pointed to the new board. We changed things a little, so yell at me after coffee. Not before. Mr. Harris squinted up at the chalk. Morning bread and coffee, that's new. Same bread, faster name, Annie said. How much? $4 with butter, $5 with jam, coffee refill included if you sit. Mr. Harris pulled out his wallet. That's fair. William stood near the pickup counter, listening. Fair, not cheap, not expensive. Fair. It was one of the hardest words in business, because it had to make sense to both sides of the counter. The new flow worked almost immediately. People ordered faster because they could read the choices. Annie did not have to explain 6 sizes of soup. Ruth did not have to shout from the kitchen every time someone asked what came with lunch. Marcus, who had no official role and had refused one twice, guided newcomers with the authority of a man who had claimed his stool by long service. Order there, pick up there, he told a delivery driver. Don't block the coffee unless you want Miss Ruth to remember your face. Ruth called from the kitchen. I remember every face. The driver moved at once, and the counter laughed. By 9, Annie had placed 11 cards in the small wooden box under the register, 11 pay-it-forward bowls before lunch. She did not say anything, but William saw her check the box twice, as if the cards might disappear. Near 10, Mr. Doyle came in, shoulders hunched against the cold. The same brown coat buttoned wrong. He looked at the board, then at the coins in his hand, and his mouth pressed into a thin line. Annie reached beneath the counter, took one card from the box, and set a bowl ticket beside the register without making a show of it. Beef stew today, Mr. Doyle? He blinked. Annie, I don't have enough. You're covered. By who? By the box. What box? The quiet one. His eyes moved to the board, then back to her. His voice lowered. I don't like taking. It's not taking if somebody gave it for this reason. Mr. Doyle's hand closed around the coins. I can pay next week. Then next week you can put one back in the box for somebody else. He stood there another second, pride and hunger wrestling in his face. Finally, he gave a short nod. Small bowl. Regular bowl, Ruth called from the kitchen. Miss Ruth. Regular bowl, Earl. He stopped arguing. Annie wrote the order, and William turned away slightly so the man would not feel watched. That small courtesy did more for William than he expected. Once, he had thought generosity meant scale, large donations, named buildings, gala dinners, press releases. Here, generosity meant knowing when not to look directly at a man receiving soup. After the lunch rush, Annie opened the register drawer and counted the morning total twice. Her lips parted slightly. Grandma, Ruth looked over from the stove. Bad? No. Better than yesterday. A lot better. Marcus set down his mug. How much better? Annie looked at William, unsure whether to say the number aloud. He nodded toward the notebook. Write it down first. Celebrate after the math. She rolled her eyes but did it. You make joy wait in line. Joy spends better when it has receipts. Ruth laughed once, and even Annie smiled while she wrote. The new breakfast bundle had moved more bread than usual. The lunch bowls had fewer substitutions. The pay-it-forward cards had added money without raising the cost for those who needed help. Nothing had been saved yet. Rent still waited. Kaplan still waited. Preston's world still moved somewhere beyond the windows. But the diner had taken its first stronger breath. The supplier call came at 2. Annie put the phone on speaker because William asked her to hear every word. The representative, A bored man named Carl began with the same line Annie had heard before. Prices were up, minimums were firm, nothing could be adjusted for a small account. William leaned close enough for his voice to carry but kept it calm. Carl, how many small restaurants on the west side do you service? A pause. Who is this? Someone helping Miss Johnson review her purchasing. How many? I don't have that number in front of me. Then I'll make it easier. If Annie's Warm Bowl increases its weekly order by adding 2 more delivery points within 90 days, what price tier applies? Another pause. This one longer. 2 more locations? Answer the question. Carl's tone changed. Potentially tier 3, depending on volume. And if she commits to a recurring Monday and Thursday delivery schedule, with payment on delivery for the first 30 days? Annie's eyes widened. Ruth stopped stirring. Carl cleared his throat. That would reduce handling. I could maybe take 8% off some items. Not enough. Beef is where you're heavy. Potatoes too. Give her 12 on beef, 10 on potatoes, and lock it for 60 days. In exchange, she stopped shopping around this afternoon. Carl gave a dry laugh. I didn't know she was shopping around. William looked at Annie. She caught on quickly. I am now. Carl was quiet. Then, let me talk to my manager. Do that, William said. Call back in 20 minutes. If not, we move. When the line clicked off, Annie stared at the phone. Were we actually moving? We were going to make him believe we might. That sounds like lying. No, it's leverage. You were free to call someone else. I just reminded him. Ruth pointed her spoon toward him. Careful, Mr. Harrington. We don't cheat people here. Neither do I, he said. Then the words caught in his chest because he had once believed that about his own family. He corrected himself. Not anymore. Not here. Annie heard the weight under it and did not press. Instead, she said, if he gives us 12%, what does that mean? William took the notebook and wrote the number. It means rent stops being a cliff and becomes a hill. A steep hill? Yes. But climbable? He looked at the board, the card box, the line of clean bowls Ruth had stacked for supper. Climbable. Carl called back in 18 minutes. He offered 10% on beef and 8 on potatoes. Annie looked at William. William shook his head once. Annie drew in a breath and spoke for herself. Carl, I appreciate that, but we need 12 and 10. We pay on time. We don't waste your driver's route. And if we grow, you grow with us. William watched Ruth's face soften with pride. Carl sighed. Fine. 60 days. Annie hung up and pressed both hands flat on the counter. I think my heart just ran across the street and back. Marcus lifted his mug. First negotiation. Ruth came over and kissed Annie's temple. Your mama would have liked that. The words quieted the room, not sadly, but with reverence. Annie looked down, then nodded once. William understood enough not to speak. That evening, after the last bowl was served and the last card placed in the box, Annie found William near the window, looking out at the street. Snow had turned gray along the curb. Across the road, a man paused to read the new board through the glass before stepping in from the cold. You were right, Annie said. About what? People can't help with something they don't know exists. William watched the man approach the counter, where Ruth was already reaching for a bowl. Your grandmother knew it first. I just put it where people could read it. Annie stood beside him. Do you miss it? What? All of it. The big company, the houses, people listening when you talk. He did not answer quickly. In the glass, he could see his own reflection over the diner behind him. Older, tired, wearing an apron Ruth had tossed at him after lunch. I miss knowing who I was when I woke up. Annie nodded. Maybe that's not gone. Maybe it's just not finished. William looked at her. No grand speech followed. She turned and went back to help Ruth, leaving him with that thought. Outside, another gust of wind swept along the sidewalk. Inside, the door opened, the bell rang, and William moved toward the counter before anyone asked him to. The next 3 days did not make Annie's Warm Bowl famous, but they made it different. The new board stayed clean. The card box under the counter filled and emptied in a rhythm Annie had never seen before. People who had once dropped spare change into the tip jar now added $2 and tapped the counter without making a speech. People who needed a bowl accepted one with less shame because the system did not ask them to explain hunger. Ruth watched it all with the careful satisfaction of a woman who trusted kindness only when it could survive rent, weather, and human pride. William worked wherever he was useful. He wiped tables, carried boxes, checked invoices, took out trash, and stood beside Annie after closing with the notebook open between them. He did not wear authority the way he once had. He asked before changing anything. He listened when Ruth said a recipe could not be rushed just because a lunch line was long. He learned that Marcus liked his coffee refilled before he asked, that Mrs. Coleman needed her bread sliced thin, that Mr. Doyle preferred the corner table because the heater reached his knees there. Small facts, once invisible to him, began to feel like the real machinery of a place. On Thursday afternoon, the supplier delivered beef at the new price. Annie checked the invoice twice, then looked at William with a grin she tried to hide. 12 and 10, she said. William folded the invoice. You negotiated it. You pushed me to. I gave you the door. You walked through it. Ruth set a heavy pot on the stove. Don't let him make it sound poetic. He also made you sweat through your apron. I did, Annie said. My heart was beating like a church drum. Marcus came in from the cold with grease on his work jacket and a folded newspaper under one arm. If anybody's celebrating, I'll take stew. You always take stew, Annie said. That's how I celebrate being alive. He set the newspaper on the counter, and William's name jumped from the business section before anyone opened it fully. Harrington transition raises questions among investors. Annie saw it at the same time he did. Ruth stopped stirring. Marcus's hand stayed on the paper, suddenly less casual. William picked it up. The article was short, polished, and cruel in the quiet way corporate statements often were. Preston Harrington had assumed full control of Harrington Foods and Hospitality Group, after what the company called a necessary leadership transition. William was described as stepping away for personal reasons. No mention of being forced out. No mention of the winter night. No mention of doors that did not open. Annie read over his shoulder. They made it sound like you chose this. That was the idea. Can they just say that? They can say many things. Whether they can prove them is another matter. Ruth's voice was low. And, can you prove yours? William folded the paper slowly. Not yet. The honesty sat heavily in the diner. Annie wanted to ask more, but a customer entered and the bell saved William from questions he was not ready to answer. He moved to the pickup counter, but his hands were not as steady as they had been that morning. Twice he checked the same ticket. Once he reached for the wrong bowl. Annie waited until the rush passed before she spoke. You don't have to pretend that didn't hurt. I've had worse. That doesn't answer me. William dried a ladle and set it down. If I let every lie hit me, I won't have enough left to help you keep this place open. Maybe you can do both. He gave her a tired look. You are very young to be this stubborn. And you are too old to think ignoring pain makes it disappear. Ruth made a small sound from the kitchen. That one came from me. William looked between them, and something in his face eased despite himself. I can tell. Later that evening, after the supper crowd thinned, a woman stepped into the diner wearing a camel coat and leather gloves, the kind of clothes that did not match the chipped floor or the fogged windows. Her hair was pinned neatly, her posture careful. She did not come to the counter. She looked at William first. Mr. Harrington. William's body went still. Evelyn. Annie glanced at him. Ruth came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands. Marcus, who had stayed late to fix the hinge on the back door, appeared from the hallway with a screwdriver in one hand. The woman noticed the room noticing her. I'm not here to cause a scene. Marcus spoke before anyone else. Then don't. Evelyn Clark removed her gloves slowly. I deserve that. William stepped away from the counter. Do you? Her mouth tightened. Yes. The name reached Annie a second later. Evelyn Clark. William had mentioned his lawyer once. Not with anger, but with a disappointment so flat it was worse. Annie folded her arms. You're the one who didn't answer. Evelyn accepted the words without defense. I am. William's voice stayed even. Why are you here? Evelyn looked around the diner, the chalkboard, the card box, Ruth's stew pot, Annie's hands dusted with flour. Because the story Preston is telling is moving fast. Too fast. And because I should have answered the phone. Ruth watched her carefully. Should have is a heavy phrase. Folks use it when the damage is already done. I know, Evelyn said. William did not invite her to sit. Say what you came to say. Evelyn reached into her coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. I reviewed the restructuring documents after the board notice went public. Some versions don't match. There are changes in the executed copy that were not in the draft your office had on record. William's eyes sharpened. Annie saw the change immediately. The weary man from the sidewalk was still there, but behind him another part had awakened. How do you know? He asked. Because I kept my own files. You told me you couldn't get involved. I was afraid. Evelyn's voice dropped. Preston already had half the board aligned. He had internal counsel ready. He had people watching every move. I told myself the documents were signed, that there was nothing I could do without destroying my career. Marcus gave a quiet, hard laugh. Career, that word covers a lot of cowardice. Evelyn looked at him. It does. William took the envelope but did not open it. Why now? Her eyes moved to Annie, then to Ruth, then back to him. Because I saw the article. Then I saw another draft being prepared. They're going to push the idea that you were mentally unfit to lead. Emotional instability. Erratic behavior. They'll use any photo they can find of you here to make it look like proof. Annie's face hardened. So working in a diner means he's unfit? To them, it will mean whatever they need it to mean, Evelyn said. Ruth stepped closer to the counter. Then they don't understand diners. No, Evelyn said softly. They don't. William opened the envelope. Inside were printed pages, marked changes, dates, initials, and a flash drive taped to the corner. He read the first page, then the second. His breathing slowed, not from calm, but from focus. This isn't enough, he said. No, but it's a start. Annie looked at the papers. A start for what? William did not answer at once. He looked toward the window, where night had settled over the street and snow gathered along the curb. Then he looked at the diner that had given him heat, food, and work when his old world gave him silence. A start, he said, toward making the lie work harder than the truth. Evelyn finally sat at the nearest table, but only after Ruth pointed to it. Annie poured coffee without asking. Not because all was forgiven, but because the woman's hands were shaking. Marcus stayed by the hallway, arms crossed, watching the door. For the first time since that frozen night, William had something more than grief and gratitude. He had a thread. Thin, uncertain, dangerous to pull, but real. Annie set a fresh bowl of stew near him. Eat before you start fighting billionaires and paperwork. He looked at her, almost amused. I was one of the billionaires. She shrugged. Then you know they get hungry too. William picked up the spoon. Around him, the diner kept breathing. Ruth at the stove. Annie behind the counter. Marcus by the door. Evelyn with her coffee and regret. Outside, Preston's version of the story moved through the city in clean sentences. Inside, the first messy pieces of the truth had arrived in a plain envelope. Evelyn did not leave when the diner closed. Ruth locked the front door, turned the sign to closed, and pulled the shade halfway down so anyone passing would see light but not invitation. Annie cleared the last cups from the counter while Marcus checked the back entrance twice, more from instinct than fear. William sat at the end table with Evelyn's papers spread before him, a pencil between his fingers and the bowl of stew Annie had forced on him still half full. You need to eat, Annie said. I'm reading. You can read with food in your mouth. Marcus snorted from the hallway. She's been telling me that for 2 years. William picked up the spoon, took one bite, and returned to the first page. Evelyn sat across from him, hands wrapped around her coffee though it had cooled long ago. She looked smaller than she had when she walked in, as if the diner had stripped the professional armor from her and left only the woman who knew she had waited too long. This draft is dated 3 weeks before I signed, William said. Yes, and this one was sent to my office? To your executive assistant, according to the system log. My assistant never showed it to me. Evelyn looked down, because a revised summary replaced it the next morning. Preston's office requested that all prior versions be marked obsolete. William's jaw tightened, and nobody questioned why a transfer of control was being rushed under a summary memo. I did. He looked up. I questioned it once, Evelyn said. Preston told me you had approved the direction privately. He said you wanted the process quiet because investors were watching. I should have called you directly. I didn't. Why? She swallowed, because by then he had already started moving people. 2 senior counsels were pushed out. A finance director resigned without explanation. Everyone understood what happened to people who challenged him. Ruth came from the kitchen with a fresh pot of coffee. Fear makes cowards out of smart folks faster than ignorance ever could. Evelyn accepted the words without lifting her head. Yes, ma'am. Annie leaned against the counter, arms crossed. So, Mr. Harrington signed papers he was never given the full truth about. That is one way to put it, Evelyn said. What's the plain way? Evelyn looked at her. He was misled. William corrected quietly. He was set up. No one argued. The heater clicked in the corner. Snow brushed against the windows like dry sand. Annie looked at the pages covered in legal marks and initials. Then at William. He was no longer the man she had found shaking outside the door, but he was not the old billionaire either. The old man would have filled the room with commands. This one read slowly, listened, asked for proof, and held his anger behind his teeth because he had learned what one reckless signature could cost. What do we do with it? Annie asked. William looked to Evelyn. We preserve everything, Evelyn said. No calls from personal phones. No sending files to people we don't trust. I'll make copies through a secure channel. We need the full execution trail, emails, metadata, witness statements if we can get them. Marcus frowned. In English, we need to prove the paper didn't become dirty by accident, Ruth said, setting the coffee down. Evelyn gave a tired smile. That is actually a good translation. William turned a page. Preston will expect me to run straight to court. Don't, Evelyn said. Not yet. If you file too soon with only this, his attorneys will frame it as grief, humiliation, and a desperate attempt to undo a business decision. Annie's eyes sharpened. That article already started that. Yes, Evelyn said. The article is groundwork. William set the pencil down. He wants me angry in public. He wants you loud, Evelyn said. Loud people are easier to dismiss. Ruth nodded once. Then be quiet until quiet becomes heavy. That stayed in the room. Annie moved to the back counter and began wrapping leftover bread. Not because it needed doing that second, but because her hands wanted work. And what about us? William turned. What do you mean? If they're going to use pictures of you here, they're not just coming after you. They'll come after the diner too. They'll say Grandma and I are part of some scheme. They'll say I'm letting you hide here. Marcus's voice lowered. Let them come say it here. Annie looked at him. That won't stop rumors. No, William said. It won't. She waited. He did not soften the answer, and she respected him more for that. What we can do, he continued, is keep the diner clean in every way. Books, invoices, rent receipts, supplier contracts, donation cards, everything documented. If anyone says this place is a front, the numbers will show food, labor, customers, and a community that already existed before I walked in. Ruth folded her arms. Our books are honest. I know. Honest books still need to be organized. Annie gave him a look. You just found a polite way to say my notebook is a mess. It is a hard-working notebook. That means mess. It means we can make it stronger. Ruth gave Annie a small nod. Let him help with that part. Your handwriting is pretty, but pretty does not scare lawyers. Evelyn opened her briefcase and took out a plain folder. Start with copies of your lease, supplier invoices, payroll records if any, sales totals, and anything related to the Pay It Forward Bowl. Keep the original card system, but record daily counts. Not names, just numbers. Annie dried her hands slowly. I don't want people who need soup feeling tracked. They won't be, William said. We track the bowl, not the person. That matters. Yes, he said. It does. The conversation shifted from betrayal to preparation. The diner became a different kind of office, one with scratched tables and the smell of onions in the walls. Marcus found a cardboard box for documents. Annie labeled envelopes with a marker. Ruth took out an old metal cash box from under the counter and placed it on the table with more care than its dented lid deserved. Inside were receipts folded by month, rent stubs, repair notes, handwritten IOUs from customers Ruth had never intended to collect, and photographs from years of church suppers. William picked up one photo. Ruth stood younger behind a table of steaming trays. her late husband beside her, one hand resting near the same wooden sign that now hung outside Annie's diner. "That him?" William asked. Ruth's face warmed. "Samuel. He could fix anything except his own stubbornness." Annie smiled faintly. "Grandma says that because he wouldn't stop working when his knees got bad. He said chairs were for guests and old men," Ruth said. "Then he became an old man and still wouldn't sit." William set the photo down gently. "He helped start this place? He bought the first stove," Ruth said. "Used, ugly, and loud enough to wake the block. But it cooked, and your family kept it going." Ruth's gaze moved to Annie. "Annie kept it going after I got tired of pretending I wasn't tired." Annie looked away, embarrassed by praise. "Grandma still runs everything." "I run the soup," Ruth said. "You run the hope." The line quieted Annie. William saw it land in her. The burden and the blessing both. He thought of Preston using the word family as a weapon, then looked at Ruth using it without saying it at all. The difference was almost unbearable. Evelyn checked her watch. "I should go before my driver starts circling the block like a guilty man." Marcus stood. "I'll walk you out." "That isn't necessary. It's late, it's snowing, and you brought trouble in a folder. I'm walking you out." Evelyn did not argue. At the door, she turned back to William. "Do not call Preston." "I wasn't planning to." "Good. And don't answer if he calls you." William's eyes narrowed slightly. "You think he will?" "I think someone will tell him I was here." Men like Preston often own loyalty by the hour. It expires when fear changes direction. She left with Marcus, and cold air slipped in before the door closed again. Ruth locked it and pulled the shade lower. Annie gathered the first stack of labeled envelopes. "Do you trust her?" William leaned back, tiredness finally showing. "Not fully, but you believe her?" "I believe the documents. I believe regret when it costs something. I don't yet know what hers will cost." Ruth turned off the coffee machine. "That's a fair answer." Annie looked at the table, at the papers that had turned their diner into the first stop on a road towards something dangerous. "Last week I was worried about rent. Now I'm worried about billion-dollar lawyers." "Rent is still due Friday," Ruth said. Annie sighed. "Thank you, Grandma. That really helped." William picked up the lease envelope. "Rent first, billion-dollar lawyers after breakfast." Annie laughed despite herself, and the sound eased the room. It did not erase the danger. It did not change the article, or Preston's plans, or the documents waiting to be copied, but it reminded them that fear did not get to take every chair at the table. The next morning came gray and hard. The snow had stopped, leaving the sidewalks crusted and the curbs packed with dirty ice. Annie arrived from the back room with her apron tied and her hair wrapped in a dark scarf. William was already at the counter, sorting receipts by month. "You slept?" she asked. "Some." "That means no." "It means some." Ruth came in behind her. Stubborn men think changing the word changes the truth. William placed another receipt into the proper envelope. "Good morning to you too, Miss Ruth." Before Ruth could answer, the front door opened, though the sign still said closed. Marcus stepped in quickly, his face serious. "Company," he said. A black sedan had pulled up across the street. Its engine ran, exhaust curling white behind it. A man in a dark coat stood near the curb, speaking into a phone. He did not enter. He only looked at the diner, then at the sign, then back to the phone. Annie moved toward the window, but William raised one hand. "Don't." "Who is he?" William's voice changed, calm in a way that made the room colder. "Someone Preston pays." Ruth reached for the coffee pot as if it were a weapon of routine. "Then we open on time." Annie looked at her. "Grandma, we open on time," Ruth repeated. "We serve coffee, we serve soup, we keep records. We don't let a man across the street decide how this place breathes." William looked from Ruth to Annie, then back to the sedan. The old instinct in him wanted to confront, to command, to strike first. But the diner had begun teaching him another kind of strength. The bell remained still. The man outside kept watching. Inside, Annie turned the sign to open, exactly at 6. Marcus took his stool. Ruth lit the stove. William slid the receipts into the metal cash box and placed it under the counter. The first customer came in stamping snow from his boots, unaware that the war had already reached the sidewalk. Annie smiled at him the way she always did. "Morning, Mr. Harris. Coffee?" The diner breathed in. The day began. And across the street, Preston's watcher lifted his phone to take the first picture. The picture was taken before the first pot of coffee had finished brewing. The man across the street lifted his phone, held it steady, and aimed through the front window as if Annie's warm bowl were evidence instead of a diner. William saw the movement in the reflection of the glass above the counter. He did not turn at once. That would have given the man what he wanted, a reaction sharp enough to be photographed, cropped, and explained by someone else. Annie poured coffee for Mr. Harris as if nothing had changed, but her hand was tighter around the pot. "He's still there." "I know," William said. "You want me to call someone?" "Not yet." Marcus sat at his usual stool, one hand around his mug, the other resting near the folded newspaper. "I could walk over and ask if he's lost." Ruth spoke from the kitchen. "You could also stay in your seat and not give him a story." Marcus grunted. "Miss Ruth, you take the fun out of bad ideas. I have had practice." The man outside lowered his phone, spoke into it, then lifted it again when William moved to set receipts beneath the counter. William adjusted his posture, not hiding, not performing. He had spent too many years in rooms where a single expression could shift stock prices. A camera through a diner window was crude by comparison, but crude tools still cut. The breakfast crowd noticed slowly. Mrs. Coleman leaned close to Annie when she picked up her bread and coffee. "Honey, that fellow outside bothering you?" "We're fine," Annie said. Mrs. Coleman's mouth tightened. Fine is what women say when they don't want other folks scared. Annie gave her a small smile. "Then we're almost fine." By 8, the watcher had company. A second car pulled up behind the sedan, and a younger man stepped out with a camera hanging from his neck. Not a phone this time. A real camera. He crossed the street, stopping just outside the window. He did not enter. He took pictures of the sign, the pay it forward line on the board, Marcus at the counter, Ruth carrying a pot from the stove, and William standing beside Annie with an order ticket in his hand. Annie put the ticket down. "That's enough." William's voice stayed low. "Annie, no, he can stand outside all he wants, but he doesn't get to take pictures of Grandma like we're animals in a cage." She moved toward the door before William could stop her. Marcus was on his feet at once, but Ruth called from the kitchen. "Marcus, let her speak. Just stand where she can see you." Annie stepped outside without a coat, the cold hitting her arms as the bell shook behind her. The photographer raised the camera again. She lifted one hand. "Don't." He lowered it halfway. "Public sidewalk. Then take pictures of the sidewalk. I'm with Northline Business Daily. We're covering a story involving William Harrington. You're standing in front of my diner. Is Mr. Harrington working here?" Annie looked at him, then at the sedan behind him. "If you want soup, come in and order. If you want gossip, you're blocking the door." The photographer gave a practiced smile. "People are asking questions about why a former CEO is hiding in a small neighborhood restaurant. He's not hiding. You found him before breakfast. Are you being paid to shelter him?" Annie's face changed, not into fear, into something steadier. "Paid? You think somebody needs to pay me to let a cold man come inside?" The photographer hesitated. That answer was too plain to twist easily in real time. The man from the sedan stepped closer, still holding his phone. "Miss Johnson, do you understand who you're involving yourself with?" Annie turned to him. "Do you understand you're standing in front of a place where people are trying to eat? Mr. Harrington is under serious scrutiny. Then scrutinize him somewhere else. My grandmother has stew on the stove." Behind the glass, William watched with his hand closed around the edge of the counter. Every instinct told him to go out there, to put himself between Annie and the men Preston had sent. But Ruth stepped beside him, her voice quiet. "Do not steal her moment. She shouldn't have to face them." "No, she shouldn't, but she is. There's a difference." Outside, the photographer tried again. "Miss Johnson, some are saying Harrington is using your business to rebuild sympathy after a failed leadership transition." Annie laughed once, not because it was funny. "My rent was due before I ever knew his name. My grandma was cooking before he walked through that door. This place was here when he had everything. And it was here when he had nothing. Don't make us smaller so your headline gets bigger. A couple of customers approaching the diner slowed to listen. Mr. Harris opened the door behind Annie and stepped out with his coffee. You done? He asked the photographer. Sir, we're conducting. You're blocking breakfast. Mrs. Coleman followed, wrapping her scarf tighter. And you're making people uncomfortable. The photographer looked annoyed. This is a public matter. Marcus finally came out, wiping his hands on a rag, then publicly moved 3 feet left. The man from the sedan lifted his phone again, but now more customers were watching him than the diner. That shifted the street. The men had come to observe, but the block had begun observing them back. Annie pointed toward the curb. You can stand there if you want, but don't shoot through my window at people who did not ask to be part of your story. The photographer lowered his camera. Can we at least ask Mr. Harrington for a statement? Annie opened the diner door. You can buy coffee like everybody else. Statements aren't on the menu. She stepped back inside, cheeks stung by cold but voice steady. Ruth met her at the counter and draped a towel over her shoulders. You went outside without a coat, Ruth said. I know. Next time, take one. Annie nodded. Yes, ma'am. William looked at her. You handled that better than most executives I've known. I'm not an executive. No. You're harder to scare. She let out the breath she had been holding. I was scared. That doesn't change what I said. The morning continued, but it did not return to ordinary. People spoke softer at first, then louder as the smell of stew and coffee reclaimed the room. A few customers added extra money to the pay-it-forward box without a word. Marcus moved his stool closer to the window. Mrs. Coleman sat longer than usual, knitting in the corner as if her presence were part of the lock on the door. Around 10, Evelyn called William on the diner phone, not his dead mobile. Annie handed him the receiver. You're on speaker? Evelyn asked. No. Good. The photos are already circulating. William looked toward the window. The photographer had gone, but the sedan remained. How bad? Not bad yet. Framed as curiosity. Former billionaire seen working in neighborhood diner. But I found something else. Preston's people are preparing a longer piece. It implies you transferred company funds to the diner. William's eyes hardened. Impossible. I know, but implication does not need proof to cause damage. It will damage Annie first. Yes. William looked across the room. Annie was helping Mr. Doyle open a stubborn jam packet, patient as if the world outside had not changed. Ruth was packing bread. Marcus was pretending not to watch every car that slowed. What do you need from me? William asked. Clean records. Today. Every dollar in, every dollar out. And a written statement from Miss Johnson that no Harrington funds entered the business. She shouldn't have to defend herself from a lie. No one should. But lies move faster when decent people assume truth will catch up on its own. William closed his eyes briefly. Send the format. After he hung up, Annie knew before he spoke that something had worsened. What now? They're going to suggest I put money into the diner. She stared at him. You don't have money. I'm aware. I mean, you came in freezing. You slept on our couch. You borrowed socks. I suspect that detail will not make the article. Ruth set the bread bag down with more force than needed. So now they come for the girl because the man would not stay broken. William's voice dropped. I'm sorry. Annie turned to him. Don't do that. Do what? Apologize like you broke our window before anybody throws the rock. He was quiet. She leaned both hands on the counter. You told me to organize the books. So we organized them. You told me honest records can stand up. So we stand them up. But you don't get to act like helping you was a mistake I made. William looked at her, and for the first time that day the pressure in his chest shifted. It may cost you. Lots of things cost us, Annie said. Rent costs us, beef costs us, winter costs us. That doesn't mean we stop opening. Ruth nodded toward the back. Get the metal box. For the next 3 hours, the diner became both restaurant and evidence room. Annie worked the counter while William and Ruth sorted receipts between orders. Marcus wrote down the license plate of the sedan on the back of a napkin and slid it to William. Mrs. Coleman volunteered to copy dates into a notebook, saying her handwriting had survived 32 years in a school office and could survive billionaires. Mr. Harris brought in a small portable scanner from his delivery office after lunch. Annie looked around at them, overwhelmed. "You all don't have to do this." Mrs. Coleman did not look up from the receipt in front of her. "Honey, people think community is casseroles and Christmas lights. Sometimes it's paperwork," Marcus added, and watching the curb, by late afternoon, Evelyn had the first scanned copies. The records were imperfect but honest. No unexplained deposits, no hidden transfers. Sales matched inventory closely enough. The pay-it-forward cards matched the added cash line. Annie's small, bent notebook had become the center of their defense. When the lunch rush ended, William sat with Annie at the counter. Her hands were dusted with flour and ink. She looked tired in a way no 18-year-old should have looked. But her eyes remained clear. "I dragged trouble to your door," he said. Annie shook her head. "No. Trouble followed you." "There's a difference." "Not much difference for the door." She glanced at the wooden sign outside, then at the card box under the register. "This door opened for people before you came. It can handle one more storm." Before William could answer, the diner phone rang. Ruth picked it up, listened for 3 seconds, then looked at William. "It's a man asking for you," she said. "Says his name is Preston." The room tightened. William stood slowly. Annie's face went still. Marcus moved closer to the counter. Ruth held the receiver out but did not release it until William met her eyes. "Quiet can be heavy," she said. William took the phone. "Preston." His son's voice came smooth through the line, polished and almost amused. "Dad, I see you've made new friends." William looked at Annie, at Ruth, at the diner full of people pretending not to listen. "No," he said. "I found better ones." Preston's voice stayed smooth, but the silence after William's answer had teeth in it. "Better friends," he repeated. "That's touching. I didn't know soup counters came with loyalty programs." William held the receiver near his ear and kept his eyes on the window. Across the street, the black sedan remained at the curb, its driver still pretending to check his phone. Inside the diner, nobody moved. Annie stood beside the register, Ruth near the coffee pot, Marcus at the end of the counter with both hands flat on the wood. "What do you want, Preston?" William asked. "I want you to stop embarrassing yourself." "That can't be all. You've never called me just to protect my dignity." A faint laugh came through the line. "You always did enjoy sounding clever when you were cornered." "I'm not cornered. I'm answering a phone." "You're answering a phone in a diner on the west side while strangers help you sort receipts." "Let's not pretend this is strategy." William looked at the metal cash box under the counter, then at Annie's notebook beside it. "You'd be surprised what strategy can look like when it isn't wearing a suit." Preston's tone sharpened by 1 degree. "Listen carefully. The article going out this week can be gentle, or it can be ugly. Right now, the public story is that you stepped away after a difficult transition. That allows you to keep some grace. If you keep digging, if you drag lawyers and that little restaurant into this, I will make sure people see exactly what you've become." Annie's jaw tightened at the phrase "little restaurant," but she stayed quiet. Ruth's eyes moved to William, then to the phone, measuring every word. William said, "And what have I become? A man who lost control, wandered into a poor neighborhood, and let people use him because he couldn't accept reality." Marcus muttered. "He got one thing right. Poor neighborhood, rich spine." William raised one hand slightly, not to silence Marcus, but to keep the room steady. "You sent someone to photograph the diner. I sent someone to verify where you were. You sent someone to frighten people who gave me a meal. No, Dad, you did that. You brought them into this by hiding there." The word "dad" landed strangely after so much damage. It sounded less like family than bait. William turned a little away from Annie. "I didn't hide. I was helped. You were weak. I was cold. You were pathetic. I was human." That answer stopped Preston for half a beat. William heard the shift, the small disruption in the rhythm of a man expecting anger and getting plain truth instead. Preston recovered quickly. "The diner will not survive attention like this. Health inspectors, tax questions, lease pressure, supplier concerns. You know how fast a small business can fold when the right people ask the wrong questions." Annie reached for the edge of the counter. Ruth stepped closer, her face calm but hard. William's voice lowered. "Are you threatening them?" I'm explaining consequences. No, you're proving intent. Another pause. Preston's voice came back colder. You think you're recording this? No. I think you're still arrogant enough to say the quiet part aloud without help. Behind him, Annie's mouth moved just slightly, as if she wanted to smile but could not risk it. Preston exhaled through his nose. You always taught me to remove uncertainty. I taught you to assess risk. You learned to confuse that with removing people. And you learned too late that trust is a liability. William looked toward Ruth's stove, where soup still warmed for the evening rush. No. I learned I trusted the wrong man. The line went quiet. When Preston spoke again, the amusement was gone. Walk away from whatever Evelyn gave you. Leave the diner. Go somewhere quiet. I'll arrange a private residence, a monthly allowance, medical coverage, whatever keeps you comfortable and out of sight. You can keep your pride in private. William almost laughed, but it came out as a breath. You stole my house, then offered me a room. I took responsibility for an empire you were letting rot. You took your father's hand, placed a pen in it, and called betrayal a transition. You signed, you lied, and you lost. That last sentence filled the diner like smoke. Annie's eyes flashed. Marcus moved, but Ruth lifted 2 fingers, and he stopped. William did not flinch. He had already lived the worst part of that sentence on a frozen step. For now, William said. Preston's voice dropped. Careful. No, you be careful. Not because I'm coming for revenge. I'm too tired for that. Be careful because you built your victory on paperwork that has started to talk. Be careful because people you frightened are starting to remember they kept copies. Be careful because the diner you call small has better records than half the men who helped you. Preston gave a hard laugh. You're really going to stand behind a soup girl and pretend you found a movement? William looked at Annie then. She stood straight, hurt in her face but no fear in her eyes. Do not call her that again, William said. Oh, now she has a defender. No, she has a name. Use it or stay silent. Annie's throat moved. Ruth looked at William with something close to approval, though her face remained guarded. Preston said, You've gotten sentimental. I've gotten clear. Then hear this clearly. If you keep pushing, that place will suffer before I do. William held the receiver tighter. His voice did not rise. If anything happens to this diner, to Annie, to Miss Ruth, to Marcus, or to anyone connected to them, every person in my old world will know exactly where to look first. You don't have an old world anymore. No, William said, but I know where its bodies are buried. For the first time, Preston did not answer right away. William continued. You wanted me alone because alone men can be described however powerful men choose. That was your mistake. I'm not alone now. Preston's voice returned low and thin. Enjoy your new friends while they last. The line clicked dead. William kept the receiver near his ear for another second, listening to the empty tone. Then he placed it back in the cradle with care. No one spoke. Outside, the man in the sedan lowered his phone and started the engine, as if the end of the call had reached him through some invisible wire. Annie was the first to break the quiet. Soup girl? Ruth's eyes narrowed. That boy needs his mouth washed with more than soap. Marcus gave a humorless chuckle. I got engine degreaser next door. Annie looked at William. He really thinks that little of us. William's face softened. He thinks little of anyone who cannot help him climb. That's worse. Yes. Ruth picked up the coffee pot and filled William's mug, though he had not asked. Drink. Your hands are shaking. William looked down. They were. Not from cold this time. From restraint. I'm sorry, he said. Annie pointed at him. We already talked about that. Then I'm angry. That's allowed. Marcus returned to his stool, but he faced the window now. The sedan's leaving. William moved to the glass but kept back from it. The car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into traffic. The street looked ordinary again, which somehow made the threat feel sharper. Annie took out the notebook and opened to a blank page. What did he just give us? William turned. What? You said he was proving intent. So we write it down. Time of call. What he said. Who was here? Evelyn's instructions had already taken root. Ruth brought over a pen. Marcus checked the clock. 5:13 p.m. Annie wrote carefully. Call received at 5:13. Preston Harrington asked for William. Threatened bad press. inspections, tax questions, lease pressure, supplier concerns. He called them consequences, Ruth said. Annie added that. Used phrase consequences. Marcus said. Called this place little. Not illegal, William said. Still ugly, Marcus replied. Annie wrote anyway. Ruth sat beside her and added. Threatened the diner would suffer. William watched them turn an act of intimidation into record. It was not dramatic. No one shouted. No one slammed a fist. They simply wrote the truth down before fear could blur it. The door opened, and the supper crowd began with 2 mechanics from Marcus's shop. Annie closed the notebook and slipped it under the counter. Ruth returned to the stove. Marcus turned back to his coffee as if he had not been ready for war 10 seconds earlier. One mechanic sniffed the air. Smells like beef stew. Annie took a breath and smiled. Evening bowl or working bowl? Evening. Been a long day. You and everybody else, Marcus said. The diner resumed its rhythm. But something had changed. Customers who had heard part of the call or sensed its weight stayed longer. Mrs. Coleman came back with a folder of old receipts Annie had once written by hand for church suppers. Mr. Harris brought duct tape for the back door seal without being asked. A woman from the laundromat next door placed $5 into the pay it forward box and whispered, "For whoever he thinks doesn't matter." William helped Ruth carry bowls to the counter. Each simple movement steadied him. He had spent years thinking power lived in titles, bank accounts, contracts, and signatures. Now he saw another kind of power in ordinary people refusing to be pushed out of their own day. Near closing, Evelyn called again. Annie picked up, listened, then handed the receiver to William. "I heard from an associate at Harrington," Evelyn said. "Preston is accelerating the media piece. Tomorrow morning. What does it say?" "I don't have the full copy, but the angle is financial irregularity. It will suggest you used influence to funnel support into Annie's warm bowl after leaving the company." William glanced toward Annie, who was wiping the counter with slow, tired strokes. There was no money to funnel. "That won't matter in the first wave. We need to release the records before they publish." "To whom?" "Not business press. Local first. Someone who understands community, small restaurants, neighborhood history. If national outlets get the lie first, we'll be chasing smoke." William looked at Ruth. "Do you know any local reporters?" Ruth gave him a dry look. "I have lived in this neighborhood longer than some buildings. Of course I know a reporter." Annie turned. "Grandma?" "Lena Whitaker from the Tribune grew up 2 blocks over. Her mama used to sing in the church choir with me." Evelyn heard enough through the receiver. "Call her tonight." Ruth reached for the phone. "I'll call her after I finish the dishes." William almost objected, then stopped. He was learning. Soup first. Dishes. Records. Then war. Annie leaned beside him and said quietly, "You still think this door can handle one more storm?" William looked around the diner. The card box. The chalkboard. Ruth's steady hands. Marcus locking the front after the last customer. The receipts stacked like small shields. "Yes," he said, "but tomorrow we reinforce it." Outside, the streetlights came on over the snow-dark pavement. Somewhere across the city, Preston was preparing a lie polished enough to travel fast. Inside Annie's warm bowl, Ruth dried her hands, dialed an old number from memory, and waited for a reporter who still knew the difference between a scandal and a neighborhood protecting its own. Ruth's call reached Lena Whitaker at 10:47 that night, and the first thing Lena said after hearing Ruth's voice was, "Miss Ruth, if this is about the church bake sale, I still owe you for 2 peach pies." Ruth sat at the end table with the diner phone pressed to her ear, one hand resting on the metal cash box. "This is not about pie." "That sounds serious." "It is." William sat across from Annie, sorting copies into 3 piles: diner records, Harrington documents, and threat notes. Marcus stood near the front shade, checking the street every few minutes, while Annie wrote the timeline of Preston's call in her notebook. The room smelled of old coffee, paper, and the beef stock Ruth had left cooling on the stove. It was past closing, but nobody had gone home in the full meaning of the word. Ruth said, "I have a story, Lena. Not gossip. A real story. And I need someone who remembers this neighborhood before it became a place people only talk about when something bad happens." The voice on the other end changed. "I'm listening." Ruth explained enough to bring silence to the line. She spoke of William being found outside the diner. of the sudden photographs, of the accusation being prepared against Annie's warm bowl, of the clean records, and the community card box. She did not oversell. Ruth never had to. Her voice carried its own proof. Lena arrived 40 minutes later, in a long dark coat, hair pulled back, recorder in her pocket, notebook in hand. She was in her late 40s, with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too many public statements, and the firm posture of a woman who still believed facts mattered. When she stepped inside, Ruth met her near the counter. "You came fast," Ruth said. "You said someone was trying to make a lie look official." Lena removed her gloves. "That usually means I'm already late." Annie offered coffee. Lena accepted, then turned to William. "Mr. Harrington, Miss Whitaker, I'll be honest. I covered your company twice. Both times your people gave me polished answers and no access." "That sounds accurate. Tonight I'm not interested in polish." "Good," William said. "I don't have any left." Lena sat at the table and opened her notebook. "Then let's start with what can be verified." "Miss Johnson, this is your business?" Annie sat across from her. "Mine and my grandmother's. Grandma started feeding people before there was a sign outside. I just help keep the lights on." Ruth called from the counter. "She does more than help." Annie looked down for half a second. "We run it together." Lena wrote that down. "When did Mr. Harrington first arrive?" Annie gave the date, the time as closely as she could remember, and the weather. She did not make it dramatic. She said he was cold, hungry, and sitting at the door after closing. She said she brought him inside because leaving him out there would have been wrong. Lena's pen moved steadily. "Did he offer you money?" "No." "Did he invest in the diner?" "No." "Did any account connected to Harrington Foods transfer funds here?" Annie's voice stayed clear. "No. He borrowed socks before he ever touched our notebook." Marcus made a low sound. "Put that in the article." Lena glanced at him. "I might." William slid the first folder across the table. Sales records, invoices, rent notices, supplier documents, daily counts for the Pay It Forward Bowl. It is imperfect, but it is honest. Lena opened the folder, scanned the first pages, then looked at Annie. "You kept all this by hand?" "Yes. Most small places don't keep this much. My grandma says memory gets tired when money gets tight." Ruth nodded. "And landlords like tired memory." Lena almost smiled, but her face settled back into work. "What about the claim that Mr. Harrington is using the diner to rebuild sympathy?" Annie's answer came slower. "I can't control what people think. But this place was here before he came. The customers were here before he came. The rent was hard before he came. The soup was good before he came." She looked at William briefly. "He helped us see what we were doing wrong. That's not the same as owning us." William looked at the table. He had been named in thousands of rooms. But this was the first time someone defended the line between help and ownership with such care. Lena turned to him. "Why stay here?" He folded his hands. "Because they opened the door." "That's not a business answer." "It isn't a business decision." "Then what is it?" William took a breath. "I lost my company on paper. I lost my house through my own signature. I lost people who claimed they cared about me. This diner gave me shelter before it knew my name. Then it gave me work. I am helping because I know food businesses, and because usefulness is the only thing I currently own that is worth anything." Lena did not write for a moment. "Do you intend to use Annie's warm bowl against your son?" "No." "Do you intend to reclaim Harrington Foods?" William paused. The old answer would have been immediate. "Yes. Everything. Every share. Every chair." But he looked at Annie's notebook, Ruth's cash box, Marcus standing watch near the shade, and the answer became less simple. "I intend to expose how he took it," he said. "What happens after that should be decided in daylight." Ruth's eyes moved to him, approving the restraint. Lena set her pen down. "I need to ask about race, because if I don't, someone else will ask it badly." "Miss Johnson, do you feel used by a wealthy white man with a public problem?" Annie did not answer quickly. The question was sharp, but not cruel. It named what others would whisper. "I know what it looks like to some people," Annie said. "I know how fast folks decide a young black woman must be somebody's charity story or somebody's prop. But I was the one who opened the door. I was the one who chose not to walk past him. And I am the one who still decides what happens in my diner. Mr. Harrington doesn't speak for me. Lena nodded. And does he understand that? Annie looked at William. He's learning. William accepted the correction. I am. Marcus muttered. Better than most. Lena turned a page. Miss Ruth, your view? Ruth leaned on the counter. My view is simple. A hungry man came in. We fed him. A broken man stayed. We gave him work. A useful man offered help. We accepted some and refused what did not fit. That is not a scandal. That is how neighbors used to behave before people started needing permission to be decent. Lena's pen moved faster. The interview lasted until after midnight. Evelyn joined by phone to confirm the documents Preston's side was preparing, and to state that no Harrington funds had entered Annie's warm bowl. Lena asked for copies, took photos of the chalkboard, the card box, the worn sign, the supplier invoice with the new rate, and Ruth's old cash box. She also asked to speak with customers in the morning. Before leaving, she stood by the door and looked back at the room. I can't promise what other outlets will do, but I can publish what I can verify before their piece runs. How soon? William asked. Early, before breakfast if my editor has a pulse. Ruth handed her a paper bag. Lena looked inside. Bread? And stew. Miss Ruth, I'm working. Then eat while working. Lena accepted the bag with a small smile. Yes, ma'am. After she left, the diner felt both lighter and more exposed. Annie locked the door, then rested her forehead briefly against the wood. William saw her shoulders rise and fall. You did well, he said. She turned. I don't know if well matters when people already want to believe ugly things. It matters to the people still deciding. And the people who aren't? Ruth answered before William could. Some folks would call the sun suspicious if it rose over the wrong house. Don't spend your strength on them. Annie nodded, but her face showed the weight of the day. She gathered the cups from the table and carried them to the sink. William helped, without being asked. Near 1 a.m, when Marcus finally left through the back to cross into his shop, he paused beside William. That sedan comes back. I'll know. Thank you. Marcus pulled on his cap. Don't thank me yet. I'm cranky when I'm right. The night passed in uneven sleep. William woke before dawn to the sound of Ruth's stove and Annie's footsteps. For a brief second, he forgot the article, the watcher, the phone call. Then the diner phone rang. Annie picked it up. Annie's warm bowl. Her face changed. Yes, Miss Whitaker. Okay, I'll tell them. She hung up and turned toward William and Ruth. It's live. Ruth wiped her hands on her apron. Read it. Annie opened the link on Ruth's old tablet. Her voice shook at first, then grew steadier. Before sunrise in a West Side diner, a former billionaire sorted receipts beside the young woman accused of being his cover story. The records told a different story. So did the soup. William closed his eyes for 1 second. Annie kept reading. The article did not make him a hero. It did not make Annie a victim. It showed the records, the timeline, the landlord letter, the pay it forward bowl, the neighbors who testified that Annie's warm bowl had served the community long before William arrived. It quoted Ruth. That is not a scandal. That is how neighbors used to behave before people started needing permission to be decent. By 6, customers were arriving with phones in their hands. Mr. Harris was first. He held up the article and said, Miss Ruth, you're famous. Ruth took his mug. Then famous still pours coffee. Mrs. Coleman came in next, eyes bright. They used my line about paperwork. Annie looked outside. Across the street, no sedan waited. Not yet. The street looked ordinary, but the air had changed. Preston's lie had not vanished. It was still coming. But now it would not arrive first. William stood beside the counter as Annie turned the sign to open. For the first time in days, he saw her smile before the work began. What now? She asked. He looked at the full coffee pot, the warm stove, the article spreading across the city, and the first customers shaking snow from their boots. Now, he said, we serve breakfast before they figure out how to answer the truth. By 7 that morning, Annie's warm bowl was fuller than it had been on any weekday Ruth could remember. The article had traveled faster than the snowplows. Customers came in holding phones folded newspapers, and the kind of cautious excitement people bring when a place they love has suddenly been seen by the outside world. Some came for breakfast. Some came to make sure Annie was all right. Some came because they had read about the Pay It Forward Bowl and wanted to add their $2 without making a fuss. Annie kept moving. Coffee, bread, soup tickets, change, thank you, good morning, yes ma'am, no sir. The line starts there. Her smile stayed steady, but William saw the strain under it. Attention was another kind of weather. Even when it was warm, it could wear a person down. Mr. Harris stood near the door helping people understand the new system. Order at the counter. Pick up at the end. Don't crowd Miss Ruth's side unless you want a lecture with your stew. Ruth called from the kitchen, I do not lecture. Marcus said from his stool, you educate with volume. That earned the first laugh of the morning. The sound loosened the room. William carried bowls from the warmer to the pickup counter, careful with his steps, careful with his expression. More than one customer recognized him now, but the article had done something Preston's people had not expected. It had placed William inside the story as a man working, not hiding. People looked at him with curiosity, but also with the rough fairness of neighborhood judgment. If he carried the bowl without spilling it, he was useful for the moment. Around 8:30, Lena Whitaker returned with a photographer from the Tribune. But this time she came through the front door, ordered coffee, and asked Annie's permission before taking a single picture. Annie looked at Ruth. Ruth said, as long as nobody photographs the stove before I wipe the side. Lena smiled. That sounds like consent with conditions. That is the only kind worth giving, Ruth replied. The photographer took pictures of the board, the card box, Ruth's hands shaping biscuits, Marcus holding the door for Mrs. Coleman, and Annie writing a lunch order with pencil marks still on her fingers. When he lifted the camera toward William, William glanced at Annie. She gave a small nod. Only then did he allow it. Lena noticed. You ask her now? William set down a tray. It's her diner. It took you long to learn that? Longer than it should have. The answer made Annie pause, but she did not look over. She only wrote the next order and called, 2 working bowls, 1 chicken, 1 lentil. By mid-morning, Evelyn arrived with a laptop bag and the look of someone who had already read 3 bad emails before coffee. She took the corner table, opened her files, and waited until Annie had a break. The Harrington response is out, Evelyn said. William came over with a towel still in his hand. Annie stood beside him. Ruth stayed within hearing distance, pretending to sort bread. What does it say? William asked. Evelyn turned the laptop slightly. They deny everything. They call the Tribune piece emotionally driven. They say the leadership transition was lawful, voluntary, and necessary. They do not name Annie directly, but they refer to outside parties attempting to exploit a private family matter. Annie let out a short breath. Outside parties, that means me without saying me. Yes, Evelyn said. But they were careful. Too careful. William leaned closer. Where is the mistake? Evelyn tapped the screen. Here. They claim the transfer documents were reviewed by independent counsel before signature. That is not true. The independent counsel review happened after the executed copy was filed, not before. I have the timestamp. William's face changed in that quiet way Annie had begun to recognize. His anger did not rise. It narrowed. Can we use it? He asked. Not publicly yet. But in court, yes, and there's more. Someone from Internal Finance contacted me this morning. Who? I won't say until I confirm they're willing to give a statement. But they claim Preston ordered a freeze on certain personal accounts before you signed the final document. William went very still. Annie looked between them. Why does that matter? Evelyn answered carefully. Because if the accounts were frozen before he signed, it suggests Preston knew the transfer would happen before William supposedly agreed to it. Ruth came out from behind the counter, wiping her hands slowly. So the trap was set before the man stepped in it. That is the plain version, Evelyn said. William turned away for a moment. Through the window, he could see the street where the sedan had been the day before. Empty now. Still, he felt watched, not by cameras, but by the past catching up one document at a time. Annie's voice softened. You okay? He looked at her, and this time he did not dodge the question with pride. No. But I can stand. That counts. It will have to. The lunch rush came hard. The article had pulled in people from outside the neighborhood, and not all of them understood the place. A man in an expensive coat cut the line, holding his phone up. "Is the billionaire here?" he asked, laughing like he was part of some show. Annie looked up from the register. "Line starts behind Mrs. Coleman. I just want a quick photo." Mrs. Coleman turned around with her tray in hand. "And I want to sit before my soup gets cold." "We all want things." The man blinked. Marcus stood, not moving toward him, just rising. The man lowered his phone. "Fine. Relax." Annie's tone stayed even. "We're relaxed. You're in the wrong spot." He went to the back of the line, embarrassed. William watched the exchange with a strange mix of gratitude and shame. Fame had made him used to rooms bending around him. Here, the room bent around the elderly woman with hot soup, because that was the proper order of things. At 2, the diner finally slowed. Annie sank onto the stool behind the counter and pressed her palms against her eyes. Ruth placed tea beside her. "Drink. I'm not sick." "Did I ask?" Annie took the tea. William sat across from her with the notebook. "You served almost double a normal lunch. Is that good or terrifying?" "Both. Great. My favorite combination." He turned the notebook around. "The pay it forward box is strong, but if this traffic keeps coming, you need a second pickup shelf, more prep space, and a clean way to separate regular customers from people coming because of the article." Annie lowered the mug. "You mean tourists? Some will be. Some may become customers. Some will only want to say they saw the place. You cannot let curiosity slow down the people who depend on you." Ruth nodded. "The workers still have 30 minutes for lunch. Fame doesn't stretch a lunch break." Annie looked at the room. "We don't have space." Marcus, who had been tightening a loose screw on a chair, said, "You got the empty storage room next to my shop. Been unused since the print place moved out." Annie looked at him. "That place has a busted ceiling and smells like motor oil. Ceiling can be fixed. Smell builds character." William leaned forward. "Who owns it?" "Same block partnership that owns my shop." "Not Kaplan." That made everyone quiet for a second. William's mind began moving. "How large?" "Maybe 600 square feet. Back door opens to the alley. Front faces the same street." Annie stared at him. "No, I haven't said anything yet." "You made the face." "What face?" "The face where a small idea becomes expensive." Ruth pointed at Annie with her tea towel. "That one is accurate." William did not deny it. "I'm not suggesting expansion today. I'm suggesting we look. If the space is affordable, it could become prep and pickup. Not a second restaurant. A relief valve. A relief valve sounds like plumbing. In restaurants, plumbing matters." Marcus grabbed his coat. "Come on then. I'll show you before you turn the whole block into a spreadsheet." Annie hesitated, but Ruth took the mug from her hand. "Go look. Looking is free. Nothing is free when Mr. Harrington is thinking." William stood. "That is also accurate." The 4 of them crossed the sidewalk after Annie put on her coat. The air was sharp but clearer than the day before. A few people outside the diner nodded as they passed. One woman called, "Good article, Annie." Annie lifted a hand, shy but proud. Marcus unlocked the neighboring space. The door stuck at first, then gave with a scrape. Inside, the room was dim, dusty, and cold. Old shelves lined one wall. The ceiling had water stains. The floor needed work, but the space was real, and through the front window Annie could see her own diner sign next door. "No," she said again, quieter this time. William looked around. "You say no when you're scared." "I say no when I see bills." "Good. Fear of bills keeps people honest." Marcus tapped the wall. "This side connects close to your kitchen alley. Could run orders from the back if city permits don't make everybody cry." Annie walked to the window. From there, she watched Ruth moving inside the diner, pouring coffee for Mr. Doyle. The thought of more space should have felt exciting. Instead, it felt like standing too close to a road she had not planned to cross. William came beside her, leaving a respectful distance. "This does not happen unless you want it. I want Grandma to stop worrying about rent. That is not the same as wanting this. I want people fed. That is still not the same." She looked at him. "Then what do I want?" He shook his head. "I can help with numbers." "Not that. For once, the answer did not sound like strategy. It sounded like respect. Annie looked back at the diner. If we did this, we don't make it fancy. No. No rich people soup with foam or tiny bowls. Absolutely not. No pushing out the people who came before the article. That is the first rule. And if it starts changing us, we stop. William nodded. Agreed. Marcus looked between them. So that's a maybe. Annie sighed. That is a don't tell Grandma yet. Ruth's voice came from the doorway behind them. Too late. They turned. She stood with her coat over her apron and one eyebrow raised. Annie groaned. Grandma. Ruth stepped inside, looked once at the stained ceiling, once at the wall, once at William. It needs work. Marcus smiled. So do most good things. Ruth ignored him and looked at Annie. We pray, we count, we ask the landlord, and we do not let excitement outrun wisdom. William nodded. That is exactly right. Ruth looked at him. I wasn't asking if it was. He lowered his gaze with the smallest smile. No, ma'am. That evening, Evelyn called again. The finance employee had agreed to meet, but only if William came without press and without anger. The meeting would be the next night, at a union diner near the old freight yards. Annie heard enough from the counter. You're not going alone. William covered the receiver. That is not your burden. She gave him a look. You're in my diner, remember? Trouble followed you here. We already discussed the difference. Marcus lifted his hand. I'll drive, Ruth said, and I'll pack food. People tell the truth better when their stomachs aren't fighting them. William looked at them, at this unlikely council gathered under old lights, and felt again the weight of Preston's mistake. His son had thought a man without wealth would be alone. He had never understood that some doors, once opened, did more than shelter. They gathered people. William returned to the phone. Tell them I'll be there, he said to Evelyn. And tell them they won't be walking into an ambush, Annie added from the counter. Tell them there'll be sandwiches. Evelyn paused. Sandwiches? William looked at Annie, then at Ruth, then at Marcus, all waiting as if this were now part of the legal strategy. Yes, he said. Apparently sandwiches. The union diner near the old freight yards looked like the kind of place that had survived by refusing to impress anybody. Its sign buzzed in red letters above the door. Half the booths had cracked vinyl seats, and the coffee smelled strong enough to wake a man from across the street. Marcus parked his pickup 2 spaces from the entrance and left the engine running for a moment while he checked both mirrors. Annie sat in the back seat with a paper bag on her lap. Ruth had packed turkey sandwiches, biscuits, 2 apples, and a thermos of coffee because, as she said, people told the truth better when their stomachs were not fighting them. William sat in the passenger seat, wearing the same coat he had arrived in days earlier, now dry but still carrying the memory of that first night. Marcus turned off the engine. Nobody walks in alone. Nobody leaves alone. If I say we go, we go. William looked over. You ran a repair shop for 20 years or a security firm? Army before the shop. Habit doesn't retire. Annie leaned forward. We're here to meet one finance employee, right? Yes, William said. Name is Daniel Price. Mid-level controller. He worked under Harrington's corporate finance office. Mid-level means he saw enough to matter but not enough to feel safe, Marcus said. William looked at him. That is exactly right. Inside, the diner was half full. 2 truckers ate at the counter. An older waitress refilled coffee without asking. A television above the pie case played a muted basketball game. In the back booth sat a thin man in a gray sweater, both hands around a cup he had not touched. He looked toward the door when William entered, then quickly looked down. That's him, William said. Daniel Price stood when they approached, but not fully, as if his legs changed their minds halfway. Mr. Harrington. Daniel. His eyes moved to Annie and Marcus. They're with me, William said. Daniel swallowed. I thought it would just be you. I don't do alone very well lately. That answer seemed to disarm the man more than any explanation. He sat back down. Marcus took the booth behind them, close enough to hear, far enough to give the meeting shape. Annie slid into the seat beside William and placed Ruth's paper bag on the table. Daniel glanced at it. What's that? Sandwiches, Annie said. I'm not hungry. That's what everybody says before they eat one. William almost smiled, but his attention stayed on Daniel's face. Fear had made a home there. Daniel lowered his voice. I shouldn't be here. Probably not, William said. But you are. I have a mortgage. My wife is 7 months pregnant. Preston's people know everything. They know what school my wife works at. They know where we live. Annie's face changed. He threatened your wife? Not directly. Men like that don't have to. Daniel rubbed both hands over his cup. A senior VP told me loyalty would be remembered. Then he mentioned my benefits package. Same conversation. William felt the old anger rise, but he kept his voice level. What did you see? Daniel took a folded envelope from inside his jacket but did not hand it over. Before you signed the restructuring papers, certain personal accounts tied to you were flagged for internal restriction, not a full freeze, more like a staged lock. It was entered as a risk control measure pending governance transition. Annie leaned in slightly. In plain words, Daniel looked at her. They started blocking him before he agreed to give anything up. William's eyes stayed on the envelope. Who ordered it? Preston's office. The request came through Miranda Vale, his chief of staff. But the approval note referenced his direct instruction. Daniel's voice tightened. I saw it in the system. I copied screenshots. Then I got scared and deleted the local files, but not before sending them to an old personal drive. Why did you keep them? William asked. Daniel gave a short, helpless laugh. Because my father worked 30 years as a payroll clerk and told me numbers don't belong to the powerful. They belong to the truth. I guess some lessons stick even when fear tries to peel them off. Annie pushed the paper bag toward him. Your father sounds like someone who'd want you to eat. Daniel blinked at her, then took a sandwich with a hand that shook. William did not rush him. The diner noise filled the pause. Plates, coffee cups, the bell at the door, a burst of laughter from the counter. Ordinary life kept moving around them, which somehow made the fear at the table feel more real. Daniel slid the envelope across. Printed copies. The drive has more. I can't testify yet. Not publicly. Yet, William asked. I need protection. Legal protection. Job protection, if that's even possible. I'm not brave enough to lose everything. William looked at him carefully. Bravery is not the absence of fear, Daniel. It's knowing exactly what fear can cost, and still placing one piece of truth on the table. Daniel's eyes reddened. I waited too long. So did I, William said. That quiet confession changed the air between them. Annie opened the envelope just enough to see the first page, then stopped. Should Evelyn handle this? Yes, William said. We photograph nothing here. We take it to her. Daniel's face tightened. No digital copies from your phones. Please. Marcus spoke from the booth behind them. He said no phones. We heard him. Daniel turned, as if he had forgotten Marcus was there. Thank you. Marcus nodded once. Keep eating. Daniel took another bite because Marcus made it sound less like a suggestion than traffic law. William placed the envelope inside Ruth's paper bag, between the biscuits and the thermos, where no one glancing at the table would think to look. Annie noticed and almost laughed despite the tension. Grandma's biscuits are now evidence storage, she said. Your grandmother would approve if the biscuits are respected, William said. She'll ask if the truth got crumbs on it. Daniel managed the smallest smile, then his face sobered. There's something else. Preston is not only trying to bury the transfer issue, he's looking at properties near your diner. Annie went still. What properties? I don't know all of them. But I saw a memo about West Side community food assets and neighborhood acquisition opportunities. It mentioned Annie's Warm Bowl by name. William's expression hardened. He wants the block, maybe not the whole block, but enough to pressure you, enough to make it look like redevelopment. If he can't discredit the diner, he may try to price it out. Annie sat back, the sandwich bag crinkling under her hand. So he calls us small, then tries to buy the ground under us. Daniel looked ashamed, though he had not caused it. That's how the memo read. Marcus slid out of his booth and stood beside the table. Meeting's done. William looked up. Why? Marcus's eyes were on the front window. A dark SUV had slowed near the diner. It did not park. It rolled past once, then turned at the corner. Daniel's face drained. I knew this was a mistake. Annie spoke quickly but calmly. Look at me, Mr. Price. You're leaving with us. Marcus parked close. You won't walk out alone. I shouldn't have come. But you did, Annie said. So don't waste the part where you were brave. Marcus dropped cash on the table for coffee they had barely drunk. Back door? The waitress behind the counter looked over. She was older, with a pencil tucked behind one ear, and the weary awareness of someone who had seen trouble before. Kitchen door leads to the alley. Don't knock over my pie rack. Marcus nodded. Yes, ma'am. They moved without running. William carried the paper bag. Annie walked beside Daniel. Marcus took the rear. In the kitchen, the cook barely looked up as the waitress pointed them toward the back. Outside, the alley smelled of wet pavement and fryer oil. Snow had been pushed into dirty ridges along the wall. Marcus led them to the side street, where his pickup waited at the curb. The SUV was not there. Daniel stopped before getting in. If they know, I'm finished. William turned to him. No, if they know, we move faster. That's easy for you to say. It is not easy for me to say. I lost my house. I lost my company. I know what it is to watch a life get pulled out from under you. William's voice softened. But you still have something Preston fears. What? The truth he missed. Daniel looked at the paper bag in William's hand, then at Annie. Why are you helping him? Annie answered without hesitation. Because he was cold. Then because he was useful. Now because what happened to him is starting to happen to us. Daniel absorbed that, then nodded and climbed into the truck. Marcus drove a different route back, taking side streets, doubling once around a closed gas station, then heading toward the diner. Nobody spoke for several blocks. Annie held the paper bag on her lap now, both hands around it as if she carried something breakable. William looked out at the dark warehouses and rail lines sliding past. He had spent years thinking his empire was built of contracts and capital. Tonight, one frightened accountant, one packed sandwich, one waitress who knew the back exit, and one repairman with old military habits had moved the truth farther than any boardroom had. When they reached Annie's warm bowl, Ruth was waiting inside with Evelyn on speakerphone and the metal cash box open on the table. Well? Ruth asked. Annie lifted the paper bag. Grandma, your biscuits helped smuggle evidence. Ruth looked at William. Did they get crushed? No, Mom. Then continue. Evelyn's voice came through the phone. Tell me exactly what you have. William removed the envelope and set it on the table. His hands were steady now. Proof they restricted my accounts before I signed. And a warning that Preston may be targeting this block. Ruth's face did not change, but her eyes cooled. Then he has poor manners and worse judgment. Annie looked toward the front door, the same door she had opened for William in the snow. What happens now? William looked at the envelope, then at Annie, Ruth, Marcus, and the phone glowing on the table. Now we stop defending only the diner. We defend the whole block. Marcus nodded slowly. That sounds like work. Ruth went to the stove and lifted the lid from a pot of soup. Then everybody eats first. This time nobody argued. By sunrise, Ruth had already turned the stove on, but the room did not carry its usual calm. The pot was there, the bread was there, the coffee was there, yet every person inside Annie's warm bowl knew the fight had moved beyond one diner. Preston was not only trying to damage William's name, he was circling the block itself, looking for weak leases, tired owners, unpaid repairs, and people who could be pressured one at a time. Marcus came in before opening with a folder under his arm and a strip of dried paint on his sleeve. I made calls. Annie looked up from the counter. You made calls before 6? People over 50 wake up early whether we want to or not. He placed the folder beside William. The laundromat's month to month. The barber has a lease expiring in March. The print shop space is empty. My shop has 3 years left, but the partnership that owns it has been getting letters. William opened the folder. Letters from whom? Some development firm. Lakefront Renewal Partners. Evelyn, who had arrived with dark circles under her eyes and a legal pad in hand, stopped mid-sip of coffee. That name came up in one of Preston's side filings. William turned to her. Connected? Not openly, but the registered agent overlaps with a firm Harrington used for property acquisitions 5 years ago. Annie wiped her hands on her apron. In regular words, Ruth answered from the stove. Preston put on a different hat and knocked on the same doors. That is possible, Evelyn said. We need proof before saying it. Marcus pulled out a chair. Then we get proof before they get the block. By 7, the first customers arrived, and the day began the way it always did. Coffee poured, bread sliced, soup ladled, change counted. But between orders, Annie wrote down names of business owners on a brown paper bag. Laundromat, barber, repair shop, corner grocery, church pantry, bus office, senior apartments. William watched her hand move fast, her writing uneven from the rush. You don't have to carry all of this, he said. She did not look up. I'm not carrying it alone. No, but you are putting yourself in the center. Annie stopped writing. Mr. Harrington, when you came to our door, you were one man in the cold. Now it's a whole block. If we open the door for one and close it for the rest, what was the point? He had no answer ready, which he had learned usually meant she had said something worth keeping. At 10, they held the first meeting in the diner. Ruth closed for 1 hour, something she hated doing, and taped a note to the door. Community meeting. Coffee inside. The room filled with people who did not usually sit at the same table unless weather forced them to. Shop owners, older tenants, church volunteers, drivers, mechanics, a retired postal worker, and Mrs. Coleman with a notebook of her own. The barber, Mr. Alvarez, spoke first. I got a letter offering to buy out my lease. Looked polite, but the number was insulting. The laundromat owner, Denise Park, folded her arms. Mine said the building needed modernization. That's what they call it when they want you gone, but don't want to sound cruel. Mrs. Coleman lifted a printed letter. The senior building got a survey asking residents if they'd consider relocation assistance. Nobody asked if they wanted to relocate. A low anger moved through the room. Not loud, not wild. Older anger. The kind that had paid taxes, swept sidewalks, fixed signs after storms, and still had to prove it deserved to stay. William stood near the counter, letting them speak before he did. In his old life, he would have taken control of the room by instinct. Today he waited until Annie gave him a small nod. These letters are not random, he said. They are testing who feels alone. That is how acquisitions begin in neighborhoods like this. One owner thinks they are the only one receiving pressure. One tenant thinks no one else is worried. One business signs because they believe resistance is impossible. Denise looked at him. And what do we do? Some of us don't have lawyers. Evelyn stepped forward. Today, you have one for the first review. I'll look at every letter here and help you understand what it is and what it is not. No one signs anything today. No one agrees by phone. No one meets privately without telling someone else. Marcus nodded. Buddy system for paperwork. I like it. Ruth set a tray of coffee cups on the counter. And everybody eats something. Hungry folks make rushed decisions. Mr. Alvarez took a biscuit. Miss Ruth, you make biscuits sound like legal defense. Sometimes they are. The first laugh came, and with it, the room loosened enough to think. Annie brought out the metal cash box. Not for money this time, but for copies. We'll keep a community file here. Only copies, not originals. Dates, letters, calls, visits. If somebody gets pressured, we write it down. Mrs. Coleman raised her pen. I can help with records. My handwriting has outlived 3 principals and 1 school superintendent. Then you're hired, Annie said. Paid? With coffee. Fair enough. William watched the room form its own structure. It was not a corporation. No titles, no boardroom, no hierarchy. But it had something many corporations faked and few earned. Trust moving across tables. The meeting ended with a plan. Evelyn would review letters. Marcus would speak to the property partnership about the empty space next to the diner. Mrs. Coleman would organize a call log. Lena Whitaker would receive verified updates, not rumors. Annie and Ruth would keep the diner open as the gathering point. William would map the acquisition pattern without putting Annie's name on anything that could be used against her. After everyone left, Annie sank onto a chair and pressed her pencil to the paper without writing. This is bigger than I thought. William sat across from her. It usually is. Do you ever get tired of being right about bad things? Yes. She looked at him. Then be right about something good. He considered that. All right, this block has leverage. Annie blinked. That's your good thing? It is. You have press attention, organized records, long-term tenants, local support, and a community story people already care about. Preston can pressure one lease. He cannot quietly erase a block that is paying attention. Ruth came over with a towel in her hand. That sounded almost hopeful. I can try again with more warmth. Don't strain yourself. The diner reopened for lunch, and the crowd came steady. Word of the meeting traveled faster than the smell of stew. People brought letters folded in purses, envelopes from landlords, business cards from developers, and stories of phone calls that now sounded different when compared side by side. By late afternoon, the community file had grown thick. Then Kaplan arrived. He came in without his usual smile. Snow clung to his shoulders, and his eyes moved over the busy room. The folder box, Evelyn at the corner table, Marcus by the window, William behind the counter. Miss Johnson, Kaplan said, we need to discuss the lease. Annie stood upright. You can speak with me here. I prefer private. I don't. His face tightened. This is a business matter. Ruth stepped beside Annie. Then it can stand under lights. Kaplan lowered his voice. You are attracting attention that affects the property. William came forward, but Annie lifted one hand, stopping him. She looked at Kaplan herself. We pay rent. We keep the place clean. We bring people to this street. What attention are you talking about? The kind that complicates ownership. Ownership for who? Kaplan's mouth closed. Evelyn rose from the corner table. Mr. Kaplan, any lease communication can be sent in writing to Miss Johnson. I'll review it. He looked at her. You represent them now? For this conversation, yes, Marcus added, and for the part where you don't corner women in their own diner. Kaplan looked around and realized the room had turned toward him. Not aggressively. Worse, attentively. Every person there would remember what he said. This is getting out of hand, he muttered. Ruth smiled without warmth. No. It is getting witnessed. Kaplan left with his coat still half open, the bell sounding sharper than usual behind him. Annie released a breath. William came close, keeping his voice low. You did that well. My knees don't agree. They're allowed to be scared after the work is done. She gave him a tired smile. Another business lesson? No, something I learned from you. That quieted her more than praise. Near closing, Marcus returned from a meeting with the property partnership that owned the empty space next door. He placed a key on the counter. Annie froze. What is that? Temporary access. 30 days. They'll consider a short lease if we clean it up and show a plan. William picked up the key, then placed it in front of Annie. Your decision. She looked at the key as if it were heavier than metal. Ruth stood beside her, saying nothing. The whole day had been about doors. Doors pressured. Doors watched. Doors almost bought. Now one more door waited. Annie touched the key but did not pick it up. If we use that space, it's not for making us look bigger. William nodded. Then what is it for? She looked through the window at the block outside, the repair shop, the laundromat, the people walking home with shoulders hunched against the cold. For making sure nobody gets pushed out hungry. Ruth placed her hand over Annie's for 1 second. Then tomorrow, we sweep. William looked at the key, then at the diner door Annie had opened to him. Preston was moving through shell companies and pressure letters, trying to buy what he could not understand. But inside Annie's warm bowl, a different kind of expansion had begun, not from greed, but from defense. Outside, the streetlights came on. Inside, Annie finally picked up the key. The next morning began with brooms, buckets, and a key that felt too important for its size. Annie unlocked the empty space beside Marcus's repair shop just after 7, while Ruth stood behind her with a scarf tied over her hair and William carried a box of cleaning supplies he had purchased with money. Marcus insisted came from the Community Coffee Fund, though no one could prove such a fund had existed before breakfast. The door opened with the same stubborn scrape as before, and cold air rolled out of the room as if it had been waiting years to leave. Annie stepped inside first. Dust coated the old shelves. A broken sign from the former print shop leaned against one wall. The ceiling showed stains, the floor was rough, and the back corner smelled faintly of oil and wet cardboard. She looked around and let out a breath. This is going to take more than one broom. Marcus came in behind her. I brought 3. Ruth studied the room, then pointed at the far wall. Prep tables there, pickup shelf near the front. No chairs yet. William turned to her. You already designed it. I cooked in church basements for 40 years. I can design a room while judging potato quality. Annie smiled despite the weight in her chest. Grandma, yesterday you said we were only looking. We looked. I didn't like the dust. Now we clean. By 9, half the block had found a reason to stop by. Mrs. Coleman brought labels and tape. Mr. Harris brought 2 folding tables from the delivery office. Denise from the laundromat sent over a rolling rack no one could remember buying. Mr. Alvarez arrived with a toolbox and said he was closing the barber shop for 1 hour because hair can wait, rent cannot. Nobody called it a grand opening. Nobody called it expansion. They called it cleaning the room next door, which made the whole thing easier to believe. William moved from person to person with a clipboard, noting repairs, costs, possible permits, and what could be done safely without rushing. He did not give speeches. He asked who knew electricians, who had dealt with city inspectors, who could recommend a plumber who did not charge like he was repairing the mayor's house. Annie caught him once near the window, watching everyone work. What? She asked. He shook his head. I used to pay consultants to create loyalty programs. And none of them understood loyalty. Before she could answer, Evelyn hurried in with her laptop bag against her side. Snow had melted on the shoulders of her coat, and her face carried the sharp look of news. William, he set the clipboard down. What happened? The finance documents checked out. Daniel's copies match internal timestamps from the archived system. More important, the account restriction was entered before your final signature. Ruth lowered the broom. So the trap has a date. Yes, Evelyn said. And Lena is ready to publish a follow-up. But that's not all. The development firm sent letters to 4 more properties this morning. Same language, same timeline. They're moving fast because they know people are organizing. Annie's hand tightened around the broom handle. Then we publish first again. Evelyn looked at her. That is Lena's advice too. But she wants people on record. Not gossip, not anger. Names, letters, copies, dates. Mrs. Coleman lifted her labeled folder. We have those. Marcus glanced toward William. And we have the block. By noon, Annie's warm bowl and the unfinished room next door had become one long line of testimony. Lena returned with her recorder and notebook, but this time she did not have to pull the story out of anyone. People came ready. Mr. Alvarez showed his buyout letter. Denise brought the modernization notice. Mrs. Coleman had copies from the senior building. Marcus brought the partnership letter and an email showing Lakefront Renewal had requested property details 3 weeks before Preston's first public statement about William. Lena listened, verified, and asked the same question every time. Did anyone explain who was behind the firm? Every answer was no. William watched from the counter, where he and Ruth had resumed serving lunch between interviews. He had thought the climax of his life would happen in court, under marble ceilings, with attorneys quoting documents and board members forced to answer. Instead, it was happening beside a pot of lentil soup, while a retired school secretary placed tape on copies and a mechanic held the door open for a reporter. At 2:30, Evelyn's phone rang. She stepped outside to answer, then returned with her mouth set. Preston wants a meeting. William wiped his hands on a towel. With me? With you, me, and his counsel, today. He says if you agree not to pursue emergency action, he'll withdraw any interest tied to the neighborhood properties. Annie turned from the prep table. He's admitting it? Not in writing, Evelyn said. He's offering peace without admitting there was war. Marcus scoffed. That's not peace. That's him trying to take the gun apart after fingerprints got on it. William looked at the room, at the people who had gathered not because of him alone, but because the threat had reached their doors. No private meeting. Evelyn nodded as if she had hoped he would say that. Then what? If Preston wants to speak, he can do it through counsel, in writing. with Lena aware that an offer was made after documentation of neighborhood pressure. He paused. "And we file emergency notice to preserve records." Evelyn's eyes sharpened. "That will force them to hold internal emails, acquisition memos, account logs, all of it." "Yes. It will also make this official." William looked at Annie. "It already is." Annie did not smile. She only nodded. By late afternoon, Lena's follow-up article went live. This one was harder than the first. It named the development firm, traced public records, showed the pattern of letters, and included the account restriction timeline without revealing Daniel's identity. The headline moved across phones in the diner before Ruth had finished the supper bread. "After former CEO finds shelter in Westside Diner. Records point to wider pressure campaign." The reaction came faster than anyone expected. Calls began reaching the diner, the repair shop, and Evelyn's office. Local officials wanted statements. A neighborhood coalition offered legal support. A nonprofit that worked with small food businesses asked to help Annie apply for equipment funding. Then, at 5:16 p.m., Harrington Foods released a statement announcing an independent internal review and Preston's temporary leave from operational authority. Annie read the line twice from Ruth's tablet. "Temporary leave?" William stood beside her. His face did not carry triumph, only exhaustion and something steadier beneath it. "That means the board is afraid." "Is that justice?" "No, it's a door opening." Ruth took the tablet and read the statement with narrowed eyes. "Temporary leave sounds like a rich person's timeout." Marcus laughed. "Miss Ruth, I'd pay to hear you at a board meeting. You couldn't afford me," she said. The room eased, but only for a moment. William knew the legal fight was not finished. Preston was not defeated by one article or one board statement. Men like him did not disappear because truth knocked once. But the lie had been slowed. The block had not folded. Annie's name had not been buried under accusation. That mattered. Near closing, after the last customer left, and the new room next door sat cleaner than it had in years, Annie stood under its front window with the key in her palm. William came in carrying the clipboard. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said. "I know, but you already did." She looked around at the swept floor, the folded tables, the wall Ruth had claimed for prep. "We call it the open door room." William's throat tightened. "That's a good name. It won't be a second diner. Not yet. Just pick up, community meals, meetings when people need them. And later?" Annie looked through the wall toward the warm light of the original diner. "Later can wait until we can afford it." "That is the best business sentence you've said all week." She glanced at him. "Don't ruin it by sounding proud." "I'll try." Ruth entered with a small pot of soup and 3 bowls. Planning makes people hungry. Marcus followed with 4 spoons. "You forgot me." "I did not forget," Ruth said. "I was hoping." They ate standing around one folding table because there were no chairs yet. Outside, the block moved under winter light. Still poor, still pressured, still facing repairs, rent, and men with papers. But it was no longer quiet in the way Preston had counted on. William lifted his bowl, then stopped. "I owe you all more than I can repay." Ruth shook her head. "Don't turn gratitude into debt. It ruins the flavor." Annie looked at him across the table. "You can repay us by helping build this right. I can do that. And by not taking over. I will remember. And by sleeping more than 3 hours." Marcus pointed his spoon at William. "That one's non-negotiable." William looked around at them, this strange board of directors with soup in their hands and dust on their sleeves. For the first time since Preston had taken everything, he did not measure his life by what had been stolen. He measured it by what had opened. Later that night, when the diner lights dimmed and Ruth turned the sign to closed, Annie stood by the front door where she had first found him in the cold. William paused beside her. "You were right," he said. "About what?" "That night, I didn't have to wander." Annie looked out at the street, then back at the warm room behind them. "No, you just had to knock." "I didn't knock." She smiled. "Then it's lucky I opened anyway." Ruth called from the kitchen. "Lock the... That wisdom lets the cold in." Annie laughed, and William reached for the lock. Outside, snow began again, soft against the glass. Inside, the stove cooled, the records rested in their boxes, the key to the open door room hung beside the register, and a man who had lost an empire stood in a diner that had taught him what a home could still become. This story reminds us that true wealth is not measured by money, power, or titles, but by the doors we choose to open for others when they have nowhere else to go. William lost his empire, but through Annie, Ruth, and their community, he learned that dignity can be rebuilt through kindness, honesty, and useful work. Annie's courage shows that one small act of compassion can grow into something much larger, protecting not only one broken man but an entire neighborhood. The lesson is simple. When people stand together, truth becomes stronger than fear, and even the smallest place can become a home for justice. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.